When a $1 billion merger collapses and your CEO's pride becomes the company's death sentence, sometimes salvation comes from the last place power ever looks, the front seat. Cassandra Vale thought she knew every asset in her empire. She was wrong. The man she'd just humiliated, dismissed, and dehumanized held 9 languages, 3 decades of diplomatic mastery, and the only lifeline that could save 200 jobs from oblivion. But first, she'd have to do something she'd never done before. See him. Stay until the end to see how one phone call rewrites everything. Like this video and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The Mercedes S-Class glided through Manhattan traffic like a blade through water, its charcoal exterior catching the late afternoon sun in fragments of chrome and shadow. Inside, the world was leather and silence, the kind of manufactured quiet that cost extra, the kind that insulated wealth from the noise of ordinary struggle. Cassandra Vale sat in the back seat, spine rigid, eyes fixed on her phone screen like it was a window into the abyss. Because it was. The email had arrived 4 minutes ago, 4 minutes that felt like 4 years. Withdrawal of preliminary approval. Merger negotiations suspended pending cultural protocol review. 12 words. 12 words that represented the death of Sterling Dynamics as she knew it. Her thumb hovered over the screen, trembling. Not with fear, but with the kind of rage that comes when the universe refuses to bend to your will. She'd spent 18 months building this merger. 18 months of sleepless nights, brutal negotiations, countless sacrifices. The Yamamoto Chen Patel Consortium wasn't just another deal. It was survival. It was the difference between scaling to dominance and drowning in debt from the Jakarta expansion that had gone catastrophically wrong. $1.2 billion, 200 jobs, her entire legacy. And now, 3 hours before the delegation was scheduled to land at JFK, her interpretation team had collapsed like a house of cards in a hurricane. Cassandra's fingers flew across the screen, her manicured nails clicking against the glass with increasing violence. Her lead interpreter, the linchpin of the entire operation, had been in a car accident that morning. Broken collarbone, concussion, completely incapacitated. The backup was stranded in Seattle due to weather. The emergency freelancer had just emailed to say his mother had died, and he was withdrawing from all contracts. 3 strikes. Universe 1, Cassandra 0. God damn it, she hissed, her voice sharp enough to cut diamond. God damn it, God damn it, God damn it. She pulled up her contact list, scrolling with desperate speed through names that blurred together in her panic. Every agency she called went straight to voicemail. Every freelancer was booked or unavailable. Every connection she had in the translation world suddenly seemed to exist in a parallel universe where phones didn't work and emergencies didn't matter. The radio in the front seat hummed softly. NPR, something about international trade policy. The irony would have been funny if it wasn't so devastatingly tragic. Cassandra's phone buzzed. Another email. She opened it with the mechanical precision of someone expecting bad news and finding worse. Ms. Vale? Given the cultural sensitivities involved and the lack of appropriate interpretation services, the consortium has voted to delay proceedings indefinitely. We cannot proceed without proper linguistic and cultural representation. We will reassess in Q2 of next year. Respectfully, Hiroshi Yamamoto. Q2. Next year. 6 months. 6 months meant bankruptcy. 6 months meant layoffs. 6 months meant Sterling Dynamics would be picked apart by vultures and sold for scrap. Cassandra's hand closed around the phone so tightly, her knuckles went white. The rage that had been simmering erupted into something molten and consuming. She needed to think. She needed silence. She needed... The radio volume dipped slightly. It was barely noticeable, a half-decibel adjustment, the kind of thoughtful gesture meant to help, not harm. In the front seat, Malik Rivers had reached over to turn down the NPR host's voice, giving his passenger the quiet she clearly needed. It was instinct. After 3 years of driving Cassandra Vale to boardrooms, airports, and emergency meetings at midnight, Malik had learned to read the temperature of silence. He'd learned when to speak and when to vanish. He'd learned that the privacy partition between front and back was more than glass and steel. It was a social contract, a boundary, that said some people mattered and some people were just furniture that happened to breathe. But today, that small kindness, that tiny adjustment of volume, became the spark that lit the powder keg. "Don't!" Cassandra snapped, her voice slicing through the cabin like a whip crack. "Don't touch anything. Just drive." Malik's hand froze over the dial. "I apologize, Ms. Vale. I thought—" "You thought?" Cassandra's laugh was acid. "You're not paid to think. You're paid to drive. That's it. That's the extent of your job description. Do I need to put it in writing?" The words hung in the air, ugly and sharp. Malik's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. His hands returned to the steering wheel at 10 and 2, exactly where they belonged. Exactly where they'd been for 3 years, 5 months, and 11 days. But Cassandra wasn't done. The merger was dying. Her company was collapsing. 200 people were about to lose their jobs because she couldn't find someone who spoke Japanese, Mandarin, and Hindi at a level sophisticated enough to handle billion-dollar negotiations. And here was this man, this driver, this invisible piece of machinery, presuming to make decisions about her environment. The rage needed somewhere to go. And Malik was there. "You know what your problem is?" Cassandra's voice dropped to something cold and surgical. "You think because you've driven me for 3 years you understand my world. You think because you overhear my calls and sit outside my meetings, you're somehow part of this. You're not. You're a service, a utility. You're interchangeable." Malik's reflection in the rearview mirror didn't change expression, but something flickered in his eyes, something that looked like disappointment, but deeper. The kind of disappointment that comes when someone confirms exactly what you feared they thought of you all along. "I understand, Ms. Vale." "Do you?" Cassandra leaned forward, her face inches from the partition. "Because I don't think you do. I don't think you have any idea what it's like to carry the weight I carry, to make the decisions I make, to be responsible for hundreds of lives while people like you just coast. Show up, clock in, clock out, no stakes, no consequences, no real contribution." The traffic light ahead turned red. Malik brought the Mercedes to a smooth stop, his movements as precise and controlled as they'd always been. "People like me," he repeated softly, almost to himself. "Yes, people like you." Cassandra's voice rose, sharp and brittle with desperation she couldn't contain. "People who do the bare minimum and expect recognition. People who think that proximity to power makes them powerful. You sit in this car and you listen to my life fall apart, and you probably go home and tell stories about the stressed-out CEO you drive around, like you're somehow connected to what I do. You're not. You're transportation. You're a warm body with a license." The light turned green. Malik accelerated with the same steady precision he'd maintained through 3 years of driving. His voice, when it came, was measured and quiet. "Where would you like me to take you, Ms. Vale?" It was the perfect response, professional, deferential, empty of ego. Exactly what a driver should say. And it made Cassandra's fury spike even higher. "You know what I hate most?" Her voice cracked slightly, desperation bleeding through the rage. "It's the presumption. The idea that you matter in this equation at all. You don't. The woman who cleans my office at night matters more than you do. At least she changes something. At least she leaves a mark. You? You're just here, taking up space, collecting a paycheck for doing nothing that couldn't be done by a GPS and a self-driving algorithm." In the rearview mirror, something shifted in Malik's expression. Not anger. Malik was too disciplined for anger, but something harder, something that looked like a door closing. "I apologize for the presumption," he said quietly. Cassandra sat back, chest heaving, phone still clutched in her hand like a weapon. She felt the familiar rush of power that came from putting someone in their place, from reasserting the hierarchy, from making sure everyone knew exactly where they stood in her universe. And then, like a guillotine blade dropping, she hit the button. The privacy partition rose between them with a soft mechanical hum. Glass and steel sliding into place, sealing Cassandra in her leather sanctuary, cutting off the front seat like an amputation. The partition clicked into place with a sound like finality, like judgment, like the last word in an argument that only one person knew they were having. Cassandra stared at her phone, at the email that spelled disaster, at the contact list she'd already exhausted. Her reflection in the partition glass stared back, pale, strained, afraid in ways she'd never admit out loud. Behind that glass, invisible now, Malik drove in silence. The radio stayed off. The Mercedes wound through Manhattan traffic with the mindless efficiency of a machine. In the back seat, Cassandra's world continued to implode in high definition. Another email. Another cancellation. Another door slamming shut. She tried David Chen's emergency contact, an interpreter he'd sworn could handle anything. No answer. She tried the translation services department at Columbia University, closed for a faculty event. She tried her former business school roommate who'd married a diplomat. Phone off. The universe had decided, with perfect mathematical precision, to deny her every possible solution. Cassandra pulled up the consortium's proposal document, scanning the linguistic requirements with increasing desperation. The negotiations required fluency in Japanese for Yamamoto's team, Mandarin for Chen's infrastructure specialists, and Hindi for Patel's manufacturing partners. But not tourist phrasebook fluency, not business casual conversation. They needed someone who understood the nuances of honorifics in Japanese business culture. Someone who could navigate the indirect communication styles that could make or break trust. Someone who understood that a slight shift in tone or a wrong level of formality could turn a handshake into an insult. Someone who didn't exist. Not in the next 3 hours. Her phone rang. Marcus, her COO. "Tell me you have good news," Cassandra said, her voice raw. "I have 7 staffing agencies and 12 independent contractors on speed dial," Marcus replied, his usual calm fracturing at the edges. "None of them can field someone appropriate on this timeline. The best I can do is a conference call interpretation service, but Cassandra." "But what?" "But you know how the consortium feels about digital mediation. Yamamoto was explicit, face-to-face interpretation only. They consider anything else disrespectful." Cassandra closed her eyes. "How bad is it? If this merger doesn't close?" Marcus exhaled slowly. "We have 60 days of runway, maybe 90 if we liquidate non-essentials. After that, we're looking at Chapter 11 or a fire sale." "How many jobs?" "Total? 237, but the first wave would be 86 in operations, and I don't need the breakdown, Marcus. I need a solution." "I'm trying, Cassandra. I really am." She ended the call without responding, her hand shaking now for entirely different reasons. 237 families, 237 people who'd trusted her, who'd bet their livelihoods on her vision, who believed that Sterling Dynamics was building something that mattered. And she was about to lose all of it because she couldn't find someone who spoke 3 languages. The absurdity of it cut like glass. She'd survived hostile takeovers, market crashes, and a dozen competitors trying to destroy her. She'd built Sterling Dynamics from a mid-tier procurement firm into a logistics empire. She'd negotiated with dictators, smoothed tensions with unions, and once literally talked a suicidal employee off a ledge. But this? 3 languages? This was going to be what killed her? Cassandra stared at the partition, at her own dim reflection in the tinted glass. On the other side, invisible and silent, Malik drove, just drove, doing exactly what she'd told him to do. "Your transportation, you're a warm body with a license." The words felt uglier now, in the quiet. But she couldn't take them back. Wouldn't take them back. Because taking them back meant acknowledging that she'd been cruel, and acknowledging cruelty meant admitting weakness, and admitting weakness meant... Her phone buzzed. Another email. This one from her head of HR. "Cassandra, I know you asked me to find every possible interpreter in the tri-state area. I've called in every favor. I've contacted agencies in Boston, Philly, and DC. No one credible is available on this timeline. I'm sorry. I don't know what else to do. Janet." Cassandra read the email 3 times, each time hoping the words would somehow rearrange themselves into something different, something that didn't mean the end of everything. They didn't. She pulled up the merger documents one more time, scanning the clauses she'd memorized weeks ago. There, buried in the protocol agreements, was the line that sealed her fate. All negotiations to be conducted with culturally appropriate face-to-face interpretation services present for the duration of discussions. Failure to provide adequate linguistic representation shall be considered a material breach of good faith negotiation standards. Material breach. Legal grounds for permanent withdrawal. In other words, no interpreter, no deal. Cassandra's hands curled into fists. She wanted to scream. She wanted to throw her phone through the partition. She wanted to call Yamamoto and beg, actually beg, for an extension. But begging was weakness, and weakness was death. The Mercedes turned onto Park Avenue, afternoon sunlight streaming through the windows in golden bars that felt more like prison stripes than divine light. Somewhere in this city, there had to be someone. Somewhere. Her phone lit up with a text from Marcus. Yamamoto's plane landed early. They're at the hotel. They expect you in 90 minutes. 90 minutes. 90 minutes to perform a miracle. Cassandra tried to think, but her thoughts were white noise, panic dressed up as strategy. Every option had been exhausted. Every door had been closed. Every solution had been... A voice crackled through the partition speaker, the intercom system she'd installed so she could give directions without having to lower the glass. Malik's voice, professional and neutral, with an edge she'd never heard before. Ms. Vale, I apologize for the interruption. Cassandra's finger hovered over the speaker button. Part of her wanted to ignore him entirely. He'd been told to just drive, and she'd meant it. But desperation made people do strange things. She pressed the button. What is it? Through the speaker, Malik's voice came careful and measured. I've been listening to your calls, ma'am. Unavoidably. And I understand you're facing a significant challenge regarding interpretation services. That's not your concern. The words came automatically, defensive. No, ma'am, it's not. A pause. But I wanted to let you know that if you need someone to handle your luggage at the hotel or run any last-minute errands while you're in your meeting, I can make myself available for that. It was the kind of offer a good driver made, proactive, helpful, utterly beside the point. Cassandra almost laughed. Almost. Malik, unless you can magically produce a trilingual interpreter in the next 90 minutes, your offer to carry my luggage is spectacularly unhelpful. The silence that followed stretched just long enough to feel strange. Then Malik said very quietly, What languages do you need? The question was so unexpected, so completely out of left field, that Cassandra actually blinked. Excuse me? What languages? Malik repeated, his voice steady through the speaker. Do you need for this interpretation? Cassandra felt something twist in her chest, irritation mixed with something sharper. Was he mocking her? Was this some kind of joke? Japanese, Mandarin, and Hindi, she said, her tone icy. At a diplomatic negotiation level, not, hello, where's the bathroom fluency. We're talking cultural protocol, business terminology, contractual nuance, the kind of interpretation that takes decades to master. Why? Do you know someone? Another pause. Longer this time. When Malik spoke again, his voice had changed. Not louder, not aggressive, just different, like he'd made a decision. I know someone, he said quietly. Cassandra's irritation flared. Malik, I don't have time for games. If you have a contact, give me their information and... Ms. Vale, the speaker crackled. With respect, I don't have a contact. I have the languages. The words landed like stones in still water. Cassandra stared at the partition, at her own reflection, trying to process what she'd just heard. You... what? Japanese, Mandarin, and Hindi, Malik said, each word precise and clear. Also Korean, Arabic, French, German, Spanish, and Portuguese. Those are my fluent languages, ma'am. If you need someone who can handle your interpretation, I can do it. The world seemed to stop. Cassandra's brain struggled to catch up, to make sense of the impossible things she'd just been told. Her driver, the man she'd just spent 10 minutes humiliating, the man she'd called interchangeable and worthless, was claiming to speak 9 languages. 9 languages. At a level sophisticated enough to handle billion-dollar negotiations. It was insane. It was impossible. It was... You're lying. The accusation came out harder than she intended, laced with defensive disbelief. No, ma'am. I'm not. Malik, I've known you for 3 years. You've never mentioned... You've never asked, ma'am. The simplicity of the statement hit like a slap. Cassandra opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. That's not possible. If you spoke 9 languages, why would you be driving a car for a living? That doesn't make any sense. Through the speaker, she heard something that might have been a bitter laugh, or might have been something sadder. Life doesn't always make sense, Ms. Vale. Sometimes the path you're on isn't the path you planned. But the skills don't disappear just because the circumstances change. Cassandra's mind raced, trying to find the flaw in this, the crack in the logic. Because if what Malik was saying was true, if he actually possessed the exact skill set she desperately needed, then everything she'd said to him, every word of contempt and dismissal, became something uglier than cruelty. It became waste. "Prove it," she said, her voice sharp with challenge and desperate hope. "Say something in Japanese." Through the partition speaker, Malik's voice shifted, the accent changing, the rhythm transforming into something formal and precise. "Yamamoto-sama, kono tabi, wa totemo gomewaku, wo okake shite, mushiwake gozaimasen deshita. Where no kaisha no fukuju ni kanshite, shinken ni hanashiau, kikai wo itadakemashitara saiwai desu." The words flowed with the kind of fluid authority that didn't come from apps or night school. It was the sound of someone who'd lived inside a language until it became a second skin. Cassandra's breath caught. "What did you just say?" "I said, Mr. Yamamoto, we sincerely apologize for the inconvenience we've caused. We would be grateful for the opportunity to discuss our company's compliance seriously, with the appropriate level of formal humility and respect required in high-stakes Japanese business negotiations." The Mercedes stopped at a red light. In the silence, Cassandra could hear her own heartbeat. "Mandarin," she demanded. Malik switched without hesitation, his voice taking on different tonal qualities, the words rising and falling with musical precision. "Chen xian sheng, women shenji lijie nin dui wen hua ling xing he cheng shi tan pan de zhong shi. Women bao zheng hui yi zui gao biao zhen jin xing suo yu jiao liu." Translation: Mr. Chen, we deeply understand your emphasis on cultural sensitivity and honest negotiation. We guarantee to conduct all exchanges to the highest standard, using the formal register appropriate for business partners of significant status. Cassandra's hand pressed against the partition glass, her mind reeling. "Hindi." Malik's voice shifted again, taking on the flowing rhythms of a completely different linguistic family. "Patel ji, हम आपके समय और विश्वास के लिए बहुत आभारी हैं। हमारी कोशिश यह सुनिश्चित कराना है कि यह साझेदारी दोनों पक्षों के लिए सम्मान और लाभ लाए." Mr. Patel, we are very grateful for your time and trust. Our effort is to ensure that this partnership brings respect and benefit to both sides, with the appropriate level of deference and formality. The light turned green. Malik drove forward as if he'd just delivered a weather report, not performed the linguistic equivalent of pulling a rabbit out of a hat. Cassandra sat back, her world tilting on an axis she didn't know existed. "How?" The word came out barely above a whisper. "How is this possible?" Through the speaker, Malik's voice returned to English, still professional, still measured, but carrying an edge of something that might have been resignation. "That's a longer conversation, Ms. Vale. Right now, you have 83 minutes before you need to be in that hotel conference room, and you have a decision to make." A decision. Yes. A decision that suddenly felt impossible and obvious at the same time. Her driver, the man she'd dismissed as interchangeable, as furniture, as less valuable than the woman who emptied her trash, was the solution she'd been desperately seeking for the last hour. The solution who'd been sitting 3 feet away the entire time. "I don't understand," Cassandra said, and for the first time in the conversation, her voice held no anger, only genuine confusion. "Why didn't you say something sooner? Why did you let me—" She stopped, the sentence dying in her throat. "Why did you let me humiliate you when you could have saved me at any moment?" The silence stretched. When Malik finally spoke, his voice was quiet but clear. "Because you were very clear about what you thought of me, Ms. Vale, and about what you thought I was capable of. People don't usually want to hear evidence that contradicts their assumptions, especially not from the people they've decided aren't worth hearing. The words weren't cruel, they weren't even particularly angry, they were just true. and the truth felt like swallowing glass. Cassandra looked at her phone, at the dead ends and closed doors, at the merger documentation that spelled out exactly what failure would cost. 237 jobs. Her entire legacy. Everything she'd built. And the only lifeline was a man she'd just told, in explicit detail, that he was worthless. Pride and desperation went to war in her chest. Desperation won. It always did, in the end. Malik. She pressed the speaker button again, harder than necessary. If you can actually do this, if you can handle this interpretation, I need you in that room. I need you to save this merger. Through the partition, she could see Malik's shoulders shift slightly. When he spoke, his voice was carefully neutral. With respect, Ms. Vale, 20 minutes ago you made it very clear that I wasn't qualified to turn down your radio. Now you want me to save your billion-dollar deal. The challenge was subtle, but it was there. Cassandra closed her eyes. This was the price. This was what happened when you spent years treating someone like they were invisible, and then suddenly needed them to perform a miracle. You had to admit you'd been wrong. You had to acknowledge what you'd deliberately chosen not to see. And Cassandra Vale didn't apologize. Ever. But she also didn't have 83 minutes to waste on pride. Yes, she said, the word heavy with implications she didn't want to examine. I want you to save my billion-dollar deal. Can you do it or not? The Mercedes turned onto Fifth Avenue. Malik drove for 3 blocks in silence. Then, finally, I can do it. But Ms. Vale, when this is over, you and I need to have a conversation about why you thought I couldn't. It wasn't quite an accusation, but it wasn't forgiveness either. Fine, Cassandra said. After the merger closes. If the merger closes. It'll close, Malik said quietly. I'm very good at my job, Ms. Vale. All of my jobs. Even the ones you didn't know I had. The partition stayed up between them. Physical barrier, metaphorical divide, symbol of everything Cassandra was about to have to confront. But through the speaker, she could hear determination in Malik's voice. And something else. Something that sounded almost like satisfaction. The kind of satisfaction that comes when someone finally has the chance to prove exactly what they're worth. Outside the windows, Manhattan blurred past in fragments of glass and steel and ambition. Inside the car, a driver who wasn't just a driver and a CEO who'd just discovered she'd been blind prepared for a meeting that would decide whether 237 people kept their jobs or became statistics. The hotel was 11 minutes away. The merger and everything that came after waited in a conference room with neutral lighting and leather chairs and a delegation who expected cultural perfection. And Cassandra Vale, who prided herself on seeing every angle and anticipating every threat, realized she'd been driving around with her only solution for 3 years and never once bothered to actually look. The Grand Meridian Hotel rose 47 stories above Midtown Manhattan, all glass and ambition, the kind of building that existed to remind people that power had a price and luxury was its own language. The Mercedes pulled into the circular drive at exactly 4:47 p.m., 13 minutes ahead of schedule. A buffer Malik had built in without being asked, because good drivers anticipated needs before they became emergencies. Cassandra sat in the back seat, phone pressed to her ear, listening to Marcus run through last-minute logistics with the kind of nervous precision that meant he was 3 seconds away from a panic attack. The conference room is set up on the 32nd floor, Marcus said, his voice tight. Yamamoto's team arrived 20 minutes ago. Chen's people are in the business center reviewing contracts. Patel just texted. He's running late, but should be there by 5:15. Cassandra, are you sure about this? Are you absolutely sure? Cassandra watched Malik exit the driver's seat, moving with the same unhurried grace he'd displayed for 3 years. He opened her door, and their eyes met for the first time since the conversation through the partition. There was no anger in his expression, no smugness, no "I told you so" satisfaction. Just a question. Are you ready to trust me? I'm sure, Cassandra said into the phone, though she wasn't sure at all. I'll be up in 5 minutes. Have Janet meet me in the lobby with the merger binders. She ended the call before Marcus could spiral further into disaster scenarios. Malik stood beside the open door, one hand resting on the frame, waiting. The afternoon sun caught the silver threading through his close-cropped hair, made visible the lines around his eyes that spoke of decades Cassandra had never bothered to count. He wore his driver's uniform, black suit, crisp white shirt, understated tie, like it was armor, like it was camouflage. "Ms. Vale," he said quietly, "before we go up there, I need to know something." Cassandra stepped out of the car, smoothing her charcoal skirt, buying herself a second to prepare for whatever came next. "What? Do you trust me?" The question was simple. The implications were anything but. Cassandra looked at him, really looked, maybe for the first time in 3 years. Malik Rivers was 53 years old, 6 feet tall, with the kind of solid presence that came from discipline and quiet confidence. His face carried West African heritage in its bones, dignity in its angles. His hands, resting calmly at his sides, were steady. No tremor, no doubt. She thought about the languages that had poured from him in the car, the precision, the cultural nuance, the absolute fluency that couldn't be faked. She thought about the alternative, walking into that conference room with nothing, watching her company die in real time, while a delegation of international partners walked away in justified offense. "I trust that you can do what you said you can do," Cassandra said carefully. "Whether I trust you as a person is a conversation we don't have time for right now." Something flickered across Malik's face. Not quite hurt, more like confirmation of something he'd already known. "That's fair," he said. "Then let me be very clear about the rules. When we're in that room, I'm not your driver. I'm not your employee. I'm the linguistic and cultural bridge that makes or breaks this deal. You defer to my judgment on protocol. You don't second-guess my translations. You don't interrupt when I'm mediating cultural misunderstandings. And if I say we need to pause, we pause. Agreed?" The words were delivered without aggression, but they landed with authority. This wasn't a negotiation. It was a boundary. Cassandra felt the instinctive resistance rise in her chest. She didn't take orders, she gave them. But desperation made strange bedfellows, and right now her bedfellow spoke 9 languages and held her company's survival in his hands. "Agreed," she said. "But Malik, if you can actually pull this off, we're going to have a very different conversation about your role at Sterling Dynamics." "One crisis at a time, Ms. Vale." Malik closed the car door with a soft click. "Let's go save your company." They walked through the lobby together, and for the first time in 3 years, Cassandra was acutely aware of what it looked like: the CEO and her driver. Except now the driver was wearing an earpiece he'd pulled from his pocket, reviewing something on his phone with the focused intensity of someone preparing for battle, and the CEO was following his lead like a soldier falling into formation behind a superior officer. Janet materialized near the elevators, 3 leather binders clutched to her chest, her eyes wide with barely controlled panic. "Cassandra, Marcus said you found someone, but he didn't explain." She stopped, her gaze landing on Malik. "Wait, are you—" "Janet, this is Malik Rivers," Cassandra said, the words feeling strange in her mouth, because she'd never actually introduced him to anyone before. He'd always just been there, part of the background, requiring no explanation. "He'll be handling interpretation for the meeting." Janet's confusion was visible and immediate. "But I thought Malik was your—" "He is. He's also apparently a master of 9 languages and diplomatic protocol." Cassandra took the binders from Janet's hands. "We'll explain later. Right now we need to get upstairs." The elevator ride to the 32nd floor happened in thick silence. Malik stood in the corner, eyes closed, lips moving slightly as he ran through what looked like mental preparation. Cassandra watched him in the reflective steel of the elevator doors, seeing him as if for the first time. This man who'd driven her to hundreds of meetings, who'd waited in parking garages and hotel lobbies, who'd overheard 3 years of her life through the partition, and never once indicated he understood any of it beyond what he needed to know to drive from point A to point B. How many times had he sat there, listening to her struggle with problems he could have solved? How many times had his expertise gone unnoticed because she'd decided without evidence that drivers were drivers and that was all they could be? The elevator chimed. 32nd floor. The doors opened onto corporate elegance, cream walls, abstract art that cost more than most people's cars, silence that felt expensive. Marcus stood near the conference room entrance, practically vibrating with anxiety. "They're inside, yes," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. Yamamoto brought his full team, 3 senior executives and 2 attorneys. Chen's got 4 people. Patel just arrived with his CFO. "Cassandra, this is the real deal. If we mess this up, we won't." Cassandra's voice came out more confident than she felt. "Marcus, this is Malik Rivers. He'll be interpreting." Marcus's face went through several expressions in rapid succession: confusion, disbelief, desperate hope, and finally a kind of resignation that said he was too exhausted to question miracles. "Can you do you have experience with—" "Mr. Kane," Malik said quietly, extending his hand. "I spent 23 years as a senior interpreter for the State Department's Bureau of International Organizations. I've handled negotiations with foreign ministers, treaty discussions, and several crisis mediations that never made the news. I'm qualified." The handshake lasted 3 seconds. When Marcus pulled his hand back, some of the panic had drained from his face. "Then let's do this," Marcus said, "before I have a stress-induced heart attack." Malik paused with his hand on the conference room door, turning back to Cassandra. "Last chance to back out, Ms. Vale. Once we walk through that door, you're committed. No hesitation, no second guessing. We present a unified front, or we lose before we start." Cassandra met his eyes. In them she saw competence, experience, and something else, a challenge. "You wanted to see what I'm capable of? Watch closely." "I'm committed," she said. Malik nodded once, then pushed open the door. The conference room was designed for exactly this kind of moment: a long mahogany table that could seat 20 floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan, lighting that was somehow both bright and soft, making everyone look authoritative without harsh shadows. At the far end of the table sat Hiroshi Yamamoto, a lean man in his early 60s with silver-rimmed glasses and the kind of calm that came from 3 decades of making billion-dollar decisions. To his right, David Chen, younger and sharper-edged, his tablet already open to what Cassandra knew would be detailed analysis and counterproposals. Near the window, Raj Patel stood talking quietly with his CFO, his expression neutral but watchful. The room went quiet when they entered. Yamamoto's eyes moved from Cassandra to Malik, lingering for a moment with polite curiosity. Chen's gaze was more analytical, assessing. Patel simply waited, his face giving nothing away. "Gentlemen," Cassandra said, her voice carrying the executive authority she'd spent decades perfecting. "Thank you for your patience with our scheduling challenges. I apologize for the confusion regarding interpretation services. Allow me to introduce Malik Rivers, who will be facilitating our communication today." She stepped aside, giving Malik the floor, and watched as the man who'd driven her Mercedes for 3 years transformed into someone else entirely. Malik moved to the center of the room with quiet authority, no hesitation, no deference. He bowed slightly to Yamamoto, exactly the right depth, exactly the right duration, and spoke in Japanese, his voice taking on formality and respect that shifted the entire atmosphere. "Yamamoto-sama, hajime mashite. Watakushi wa Malik Rivers to moshimasu. Honjitsu no kaigi no tsuyaku otanto sasete itadakimasu. Kongo tomo yoroshiku onegai itashimasu." The effect was immediate. Yamamoto's expression shifted from polite neutrality to genuine interest. He responded in Japanese, his words flowing with the kind of cultural complexity that would have been impossible to navigate without deep understanding. Malik translated without missing a beat, his voice neutral but precise. "Mr. Yamamoto welcomes you and expresses appreciation for the professionalism of having appropriate interpretation present. He notes that this demonstrates Sterling Dynamics' respect for cultural protocol, which had been a concern." Cassandra felt relief bloom in her chest, but she kept her expression neutral. "Please tell Mr. Yamamoto that we take these partnerships seriously and proper communication is the foundation of mutual respect." Malik turned back to Yamamoto. And the Japanese that emerged was not a simple translation, but a cultural translation, taking Cassandra's statement and rendering it with the appropriate level of humility, formality, and business sophistication. Yamamoto nodded, satisfied. Malik shifted to Mandarin, addressing Chen with similar cultural precision. The Mandarin flowed with tonal accuracy that couldn't be approximated, carrying nuances that made Chen lean forward with visible interest. Chen Xian Sheng, Hen Rong Xing Jian Dao Nin. Woduinin zai jichu sheshiling yu de gongzuo yu hen shen de jingpei, Chen replied in rapid Mandarin, his words testing, probing. Cassandra couldn't understand a word, but she could read body language, and Chen's posture had shifted from skeptical to engaged. Malik translated. Mr. Chen says he's pleased to work with someone who understands the importance of linguistic accuracy in contractual negotiations. He asks about your background in interpretation. Before Cassandra could formulate a response, Malik continued in English, addressing the room. I spent 23 years with the United States State Department, specializing in complex multinational negotiations. My focus was on ensuring that linguistic precision matched legal precision, so that all parties understood not just the words, but the full implications of agreements. He delivered the explanation like a resume, factual and confident, and then immediately shifted to Hindi, speaking to Patel with warmth that somehow didn't diminish the professionalism. Patel's response came in Hindi, flowing and conversational, with the kind of ease that said he was testing whether this interpreter was really fluent or just performing. Malik matched him effortlessly, and Cassandra watched as Patel's expression went from neutral to impressed. Mr. Patel says he's looking forward to productive discussions, Malik translated. He notes that it's rare to find interpretation of this caliber in corporate settings, and he considers it a very positive sign. The room settled into a different energy, still professional, still high stakes, but with a foundation of mutual respect that hadn't existed 5 minutes ago. Marcus looked like he might cry with relief. Cassandra felt something twist in her chest. Not just relief, but something more complicated. This man had been sitting in her car for 3 years. 3 years. And she'd never known, never asked, never imagined that the person driving her to meetings might be more qualified than half the people sitting at the table. The meeting began in earnest. Yamamoto started with concerns about the Jakarta facility, specifically questions about environmental compliance and community impact that had to be addressed with tremendous cultural sensitivity. In Japanese culture, Cassandra knew, direct accusation was avoided, but the implications were clear: demonstrate responsibility or lose trust. Malik navigated the translation with surgical precision, rendering Yamamoto's carefully indirect concerns in ways that preserved face while ensuring clarity. When Cassandra responded, he translated her answers back with appropriate humility and detail, turning confident American business speak into respectful Japanese protocol. Chen jumped in with questions about the supply chain integration, complex logistical details that required not just translation, but technical understanding. Malik didn't hesitate. He translated technical terminology with accuracy that suggested he understood the logistics business as well as the languages, making sure nothing was lost in the cultural transfer. Patel raised concerns about manufacturing oversight and quality control, questions that touched on both business operation and cultural expectations about partnership versus hierarchy. Malik mediated the exchange with nuance, making sure that Cassandra's explanations landed with the right balance of confidence and collaboration. An hour passed. Then 2. The merger documents came out, 300 pages of legal complexity that had to be reviewed with excruciating attention to detail, clauses about profit sharing, paragraphs about decision-making authority, sections about cultural integration and operational oversight. Every word mattered, every phrase carried implications. And Malik translated all of it. Not just word-for-word translation, but contextual interpretation. When a particular English clause could be misunderstood in Japanese business culture, he flagged it. When Mandarin phrasing implied hierarchy that wasn't intended, he clarified. When Hindi communication patterns suggested formality levels that needed adjustment, he guided the conversation. He was conducting an orchestra, 3 languages, multiple cultural frameworks, a dozen different people with competing priorities and communication styles, and somehow making it sound like harmony. Cassandra watched him work and felt a strange mixture of awe and shame. This man was a master, an absolute master of his craft. and she'd called him interchangeable. The meeting hit its first crisis at 7:23 p.m. Chen's legal team raised an issue with intellectual property clauses, specifically concerns about patent protections in the joint venture. The Mandarin came rapid-fire and aggressive, the tone shifting from collaborative to adversarial in seconds. Cassandra felt the room tense. This was the moment mergers died, when legal concerns became accusations, when partnership language turned into territorial defense. Chen's lead attorney spoke in clipped Mandarin, his words sharp enough that even without understanding the language, Cassandra could hear the threat. Malik listened without interrupting, his expression neutral but focused. When the attorney finished, Malik didn't immediately translate. Instead, he turned to Chen and spoke in Mandarin, not translating, but mediating, his voice calm, his words careful. Chen responded, still tense but less aggressive. Malik continued in Mandarin, drawing out the specific concerns, clarifying misunderstandings, finding the actual issue beneath the emotional reaction. Finally, he turned to Cassandra and translated. Mr. Chen's team is concerned that the patent sharing clause could allow Sterling Dynamics to claim ownership of innovations developed by Chen's engineers. This touches on a larger cultural concern about Western companies exploiting Asian innovation. They need explicit reassurance that the partnership is genuinely equal. The words were diplomatic, but the message was clear. Fix this or lose everything. Cassandra took a breath. This was her expertise, turning concern into confidence, finding the language that built bridges instead of walls. Please tell Mr. Chen and his team that I understand the concern, and it's absolutely legitimate. Our intention with the patent clause is collaborative development with shared ownership, not appropriation. We can amend the language to make explicit that innovations remain with their originating teams, with licensing rights for joint venture applications only. The goal is mutual benefit, not extraction. Malik translated, but he didn't just translate words. He translated intent, rendering Cassandra's explanation with cultural sensitivity that acknowledged the history behind Chen's concerns while offering concrete solutions. Chen listened. His attorney listened. The tension in the room shifted. Chen spoke in Mandarin, his tone softening. Malik translated. Mr. Chen appreciates the clarification and the willingness to adjust the language. He suggests having both legal teams work on revised patent language tonight, with review tomorrow morning. He also wants to emphasize that true partnership requires ongoing communication about concerns, not just contractual precision. Absolutely agreed, Cassandra said. Ongoing communication is exactly what we're building here. The crisis passed. The meeting continued. At 8:47 p.m., they broke for dinner, catered Japanese, Chinese, and Indian cuisine, brought into an adjacent room because the hotel staff had been briefed and was operating at the level of excellence that came with charging $4,000 per night for suites. Cassandra found herself standing near the window with Malik, both of them holding plates of food they were too exhausted to eat, watching the Manhattan skyline light up in the darkness. "You saved us in there?" Cassandra said quietly. The patent issue would have killed the deal. Malik took a sip of water. The patent issue was always going to come up. Chen's been burned before by Western companies treating Chinese innovation as raw material for exploitation. If we hadn't addressed it tonight, it would have surfaced later with more damage. "How did you know?" Cassandra turned to face him. "How did you know exactly how to navigate that?" "Because I've seen it before." Malik's voice was tired but steady. "I spent 7 years based in Beijing, handling negotiations between U.S. tech companies and Chinese manufacturers. I've watched dozens of deals die because Americans didn't understand that what sounds like legal precision in English can sound like ownership theft in Mandarin. Language isn't just vocabulary, Ms. Vale. It's history, it's cultural memory. Every word carries context." Cassandra set down her untouched plate. 23 years at the State Department, 9 languages, crisis mediation experience, and you ended up driving my car. What happened?" Malik was quiet for a long moment, his eyes on the skyline. "That's a long story," he finally said, "and we still have 3 hours of negotiation ahead of us tonight. Maybe we save that conversation for later." "Later," Cassandra agreed, "but Malik? We're having that conversation. That's not optional anymore." Something shifted in Malik's expression. Acknowledgement, maybe, or resignation, or both. "Later," he repeated. They returned to the conference room at 9:15 p.m. The revised patent language was distributed. Technical discussions continued, profit distribution models, operational oversight structures, cultural integration strategies for the 237 employees whose jobs hung in the balance. Malik translated it all. Every word, every nuance, every cultural implication. He corrected misunderstandings before they became conflicts. He clarified intentions before they became accusations. He built bridges between communication styles that had nothing in common except a shared desire to make the partnership work. At 11:43 p.m., Yamamoto stood and spoke in Japanese, formal words that carried weight. Malik translated, his voice betraying the first hint of exhaustion. Mr. Yamamoto says that tonight's discussions have addressed his primary concerns. He believes that with the revised patent language and the demonstrated commitment to cultural respect, the partnership can move forward. He proposes a signing ceremony tomorrow at 2 p.m., pending final legal review tonight. Chen nodded, speaking in Mandarin. Mr. Chen agrees. He's impressed by the level of detail and the willingness to address concerns directly. He'll have his legal team finalize the documents overnight. Patel added his approval in Hindi, warmth in his voice. Mr. Patel says he's honored to be part of a partnership built on mutual respect and clear communication. He looks forward to building something significant together. The room erupted in handshakes and bows, the formal ritual of business agreement sealed in good faith. Marcus looked like he might actually start crying. Janet was frantically texting the legal team, and Cassandra stood in the center of the room, watching Malik navigate the post-meeting formalities with the same grace he'd shown all night, and realized something fundamental had shifted. This man had saved her company, saved 237 jobs, salvaged a merger that had been dying in real time just hours ago. And he'd done it while she was still processing the fact that she'd spent 3 years never bothering to ask him a single personal question. The delegation filed out at 12:17 a.m., exchanging final pleasantries and scheduling details for tomorrow's ceremony. Marcus and Janet left to coordinate with the legal teams. The conference room emptied until it was just Cassandra and Malik, standing in the wreckage of coffee cups and document binders and the exhausted aftermath of a crisis averted. Signing ceremony at 2 p.m. tomorrow, Cassandra said, her voice hollow with relief and something darker. We did it. You did it, Malik corrected quietly. I just made sure everyone understood each other. Don't. The word came out sharper than she intended. Don't diminish what you did tonight. You didn't just translate words. You saved everything. She stopped, struggling with language in a way that felt bitterly ironic. Malik gathered his things, the earpiece, his phone, the small notebook where he'd been taking notes in 3 different alphabets. His movements were careful, deliberate, the gestures of someone who'd learned to be invisible. Ms. Vale, he said quietly, we should both get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be long. Malik, wait. Cassandra's hand went to her temple, exhaustion and adrenaline crash hitting simultaneously. Before you go, there's something I need to say. He paused, waiting. What I said in the car today, about you being interchangeable, about you not mattering. The words felt like swallowing glass. I was wrong, spectacularly, cruelly wrong, and don't. Malik's voice was gentle but firm. Don't apologize tonight, Ms. Vale. You're exhausted. You're relieved. You're processing what just happened. Whatever you say right now won't be what you actually mean. But I need you to know, I know. He met her eyes. I know you were scared. I know you were desperate. I know people say things they don't mean when everything's falling apart. But Ms. Vale, those things you said, you did mean them, at least in that moment. And that's what we need to talk about later. Not the apology, not the guilt, but why you believed those things in the first place. The observation landed like a surgical strike, precise, unavoidable, true. Cassandra had no response. Malik headed for the door, then paused with his hand on the frame. The car is still parked in the hotel garage. I'll be available tomorrow to drive you to the signing ceremony, unless you'd prefer different arrangements. No. The word came out too quickly, too desperate. No, I need you there tomorrow. For the ceremony, not as the driver, as she struggled for the right word. As the reason it's happening at all, Malik finished quietly. I'll be there, Ms. Vale. Good night. He left, and Cassandra stood alone in the empty conference room, surrounded by the evidence of a crisis averted, and a truth she could no longer ignore. She'd spent 3 years blind to the person sitting 3 feet away from her, 3 years assuming that titles and job descriptions defined capability, 3 years treating invisibility as truth instead of asking a single question that might have revealed otherwise. And tonight, that blindness had nearly cost her everything. Her phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. I don't know who that man is or where you found him, but I'm building him a statue. Patent language is finalized. Chen's team approved. Legal says we're clear for signing tomorrow. We're going to make it. Cassandra read the message 3 times, relief warring with something much more complicated in her chest. They were going to make it. The merger would close. 237 jobs would be saved. Sterling Dynamics would survive. Because the man she'd called worthless turned out to be the most valuable person in the room. The irony was almost unbearable. Cassandra gathered her things and headed for the elevator, her reflection in the darkened conference room windows showing a woman who'd just learned that the most dangerous kind of blindness wasn't the inability to see. It was the decision to never look. The elevator descended through 47 floors of corporate ambition and expensive silence, carrying her down from the heights where deals were made and empires were built, down to street level where the Mercedes waited in the garage and a man who spoke 9 languages sat behind the wheel, still wearing his driver's uniform like armor against a world that had decided what he was worth without ever asking what he knew. Tomorrow, they would sign the papers. Tomorrow, they would save the company. Tomorrow, 237 people would keep their jobs and never know how close they'd come to disaster. But tonight, Cassandra Vale had to sit with the knowledge that she'd been driving around with salvation in the front seat for 3 years and had been too blind, too arrogant, too absolutely certain of her own perception to notice. The elevator doors opened. The garage stretched out in concrete and fluorescent light. The Mercedes sat in its reserved space, polished and perfect and waiting. And Cassandra walked toward it, knowing that nothing, not the merger, not the money, not the success, would ever erase the memory of what she'd said to the man who'd saved her from herself. Some wounds didn't heal with apologies. Some lessons only came through shame. The morning came too early and too bright, Manhattan sunlight streaming through Cassandra's hotel room windows with the kind of aggressive cheerfulness that felt personally offensive after 4 hours of sleep. She'd spent most of the night staring at the ceiling, replaying the conference room in her mind. Not the triumph of the merger being saved, but the moment Malik had transformed from invisible to essential in the space of a single sentence. Her phone showed 43 unread messages. Most were from Marcus and Janet, coordinating the signing ceremony logistics. 3 were from board members who'd somehow already heard that the merger was back on track and wanted to take credit. 1 was from her mother, asking if she was eating enough vegetables. None were from Malik. Cassandra had typed and deleted 7 different messages to him between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m., each one trying and failing to capture something that felt too complicated for text. Thank you felt insufficient. I'm sorry felt performative. I need to understand who you are felt invasive. So she'd sent nothing, and now it was 9:47 a.m. and she had 4 hours until a signing ceremony where she'd stand in front of international partners and pretend she'd been in control the entire time, when the truth was, she'd been saved by a man whose last name she'd only learned yesterday when she'd had to introduce him. The realization sat in her stomach like lead. She showered, dressed in the charcoal Armani suit she'd brought for the ceremony, applied makeup with the mechanical precision of someone who'd done it 10,000 times. The woman in the mirror looked like a CEO, confident, polished, in control. The woman in the mirror was a liar. Her phone rang. Marcus. Please tell me everything's still on track, Cassandra said by way of greeting. Better than on track. Marcus sounded like he'd mainlined espresso and optimism. Legal finished the revised documents at 3 a.m. Chen's team approved at 4. Yamamoto's people signed off at 6. Patel's CFO just called. They're thrilled with the final language. Cassandra, we're actually doing this. We're actually closing this deal. The relief should have been overwhelming. Instead, Cassandra felt something more complicated, gratitude mixed with a shame she couldn't quite swallow. Where's Malik? The question came out before she could stop it. Marcus paused. Your driver? I mean, I assume he's wherever drivers go when they're not driving. Why? Because he's not just my driver, Marcus. He's the only reason we're having this conversation, and I need to make sure he's going to be at the ceremony. Another pause, longer this time. Cassandra, are you okay? You sound, I'm fine. Just find Malik and make sure he knows he's expected at the signing. Not as staff, as a participant. He should be in that room when we close this deal. Okay, but just do it, Marcus, please. She ended the call and stared at her phone, at the blank message thread where she still hadn't figured out what to say. The cursor blinked accusingly. Finally, she typed, "Thank you for last night. I'll see you at the ceremony." She stared at the words for 30 seconds, then deleted them. Too casual, too dismissive of what had actually happened. She tried again. Malik, I need to talk to you before the signing. Can we meet? Delete. Too demanding. Too much about her needs instead of his humanity. Third attempt. I owe you more than I can express in a text message, but I'm going to try anyway in person. Please be at the ceremony today. She hovered over send for 10 full seconds, then put the phone down without sending anything at all. Some conversations couldn't happen through screens. The hotel restaurant was the kind of place where breakfast cost $47 and came with tablecloths that had never seen a coffee stain. Cassandra sat alone at a corner table, pushing eggs around her plate and pretending to read the merger documents one final time when Janet appeared with the kind of nervous energy that meant either very good news or absolute catastrophe. We have a situation, Janet said, sliding into the chair across from Cassandra without waiting for an invitation. Cassandra's stomach dropped. What kind of situation? The board found out about Malik. Found out what about Malik? Janet pulled out her tablet, pulling up an email thread with the kind of subject line that made Cassandra's teeth hurt. Urgent. Interpreter credentials verification required. Richard Berkowitz called an emergency board meeting for 11 a.m., Janet said, her voice tight. He's questioning whether Malik is actually qualified to handle interpretation for a deal of this magnitude. He's demanding to see State Department credentials, professional certifications, references from previous high-stakes negotiations. He's saying that bringing in an unvetted interpreter is grounds for negligence, and that the board should delay the signing until proper due diligence is completed. Cassandra felt rage bloom in her chest, hot and immediate. Richard Berkowitz, the board member who'd fought her on every decision for the past 18 months, who'd called the Jakarta expansion reckless ambition, who'd probably been hoping the merger would collapse so he could engineer a vote of no confidence and install someone he could control. Berkowitz wasn't even in that conference room, Cassandra said, her voice dangerously quiet. He didn't see what Malik did. He didn't watch him navigate 3 languages and multiple cultural frameworks for 6 hours without a single mistake. He's just looking for a way to undermine me. I know, Janet said, but he's got ammunition now. He's pointing out that you've never mentioned Malik's qualifications in the 3 years he's worked for you. He's asking why, if Malik is so skilled, he's been working as a driver instead of in a professional capacity. He's implying that either Malik isn't who he claims to be, or you've been negligent in utilizing company resources. The trap was elegant in its simplicity. If Malik was genuinely qualified, Cassandra looked incompetent for not recognizing it sooner. If Malik wasn't qualified, she looked reckless for trusting him with a billion-dollar negotiation. Either way, Berkowitz got to paint her as unfit for leadership. What time is the board meeting? Cassandra asked. 11. But Cassandra, you can't just ignore this. Berkowitz has 3 other board members backing him. If he pushes for a delay and they vote with him, then the consortium walks, the merger dies, and Sterling Dynamics declares bankruptcy by February? Cassandra stood up, breakfast forgotten. Get Malik on the phone. Now. I tried. He's not answering. The anxiety that had been simmering burst into something sharper. What do you mean he's not answering? I mean, I've called him 4 times in the last hour, and every call goes straight to voicemail. Marcus tried too. Nothing. Janet's expression shifted to concern. Cassandra, what if he decided not to come? What if after last night, after everything that happened, he wouldn't. The words came out more confident than Cassandra felt. He said he'd be here. But even as she said it, doubt crept in. Why would he come? Why would he show up to help the woman who'd spent 3 years treating him like furniture and then, in a moment of crisis, had torn into him with deliberate cruelty? He'd saved her company, proven his worth beyond any question, and now the board was questioning his credentials like he was some kind of fraud. Why would he subject himself to that? Cassandra grabbed her phone and dialed Malik's number. It rang once, then clicked to voicemail. Malik, it's Cassandra. I know you said we'd talk later, but later needs to be now. The board is calling an emergency meeting and they're questioning your qualifications. I need you to call me back immediately so we can handle this together. Please. She ended the call and immediately tried again. Voicemail. Malik, I'm serious. Call me back. This is important. Third attempt. Same result. Janet watched with growing alarm. Cassandra, what if he's gone? What if he decided the whole thing wasn't worth it? Then we're in trouble, Cassandra said quietly. Because without Malik, the consortium won't sign. And without the signing, we lose everything. Her phone buzzed. For a split second, hope surged, but it was just Marcus with an update on catering arrangements for the ceremony. The ceremony that might not happen. The signing that was falling apart for entirely different reasons than it had been falling apart yesterday. Cassandra looked at Janet, saw her own fear reflected back. Find him, she said. Check the garage, check the hotel lobby, check anywhere a person might go. And Janet, when you find him, you tell him that I'm handling the board and that his presence at that signing ceremony is non-negotiable. Not because I'm ordering him, but because he deserves to be there when this deal closes. Janet nodded and hurried off, already pulling out her phone. Cassandra stood alone in the hotel restaurant, surrounded by wealthy people eating $47 breakfasts and having normal problems, and felt the universe tightening around her like a noose. She'd spent 3 years not seeing Malik. Now, when she desperately needed him to be visible, he'd disappeared. The irony was almost poetic. The boardroom Sterling Dynamics rented for the emergency meeting was smaller than the conference room from last night, but somehow more intimidating. All dark wood and leather chairs and the kind of corporate formality that existed to remind everyone that power had protocols. Richard Berkowitz sat at the head of the table like a judge preparing to deliver a verdict. His silver hair perfectly styled, his suit probably costing more than most people's monthly rent. 3 other board members flanked him, Patricia Yong, Thomas Crawford, and David Ellington, all wearing expressions that ranged from concern to openly skeptical. Marcus sat to Cassandra's right, looking like he wanted to be literally anywhere else. Janet had texted 5 minutes ago, "Still can't find Malik. Checked everywhere. He's gone." Cassandra had read the message 3 times, each time hoping the words would somehow change. They hadn't. "Let's begin," Berkowitz said, his voice carrying the false warmth of someone about to destroy you while smiling. "Cassandra, thank you for making time for this meeting on such short notice. I know you have a signing ceremony in 3 hours, which is exactly why we need to address this situation immediately." "What situation would that be, Richard?" Cassandra kept her voice level, professional. "As I understand it, the merger is on track. All legal documents have been finalized and approved by all parties, and we're proceeding exactly as planned." "The situation," Berkowitz said, "is that you brought an unvetted, uncredentialed interpreter into a billion-dollar negotiation without proper due diligence, exposing this company to significant legal and reputational risk." Patricia Yong leaned forward, her expression genuinely worried rather than antagonistic. "Cassandra, I've reviewed the meeting notes from last night. This Malik Rivers apparently handled interpretation for the entire consortium, multiple languages, complex legal terminology, cultural mediation. That level of responsibility typically requires extensive credentials verification, background checks, professional insurance. Do we have any of that on file?" "What we have on file," Cassandra said carefully, "is 3 years of employment history showing Malik Rivers as a reliable professional member of our team. What we have from last night is 6 hours of flawless interpretation that salvaged a merger 3 hours from complete collapse. What we have is the consortium's explicit approval and satisfaction with the quality of communication." What we don't have, Thomas Crawford said, his voice dry, is any documentation proving this man is actually who he claims to be. You said he worked for the State Department? He told me he spent 23 years as a senior interpreter in the Bureau of International Organizations. Told you. Berkowitz seized on the words like a weapon. Cassandra, in 3 years of employing this man, did you ever verify those credentials? The silence that followed was damning. No, Cassandra said quietly. I didn't. And why not? Berkowitz pressed. Why would you not verify the background of someone you're now asking us to trust with the most important negotiation in this company's history? Because I thought he was just a driver. Because I never bothered to ask him a single question about his background. Because I was so absolutely certain that people's job titles defined their capabilities that it never occurred to me to look deeper. The answers screamed in her head, but she couldn't say them out loud. Not here. Not to these people who were looking for any excuse to undermine her authority. Because, she said instead, in 3 years he gave me no reason to question his professionalism or integrity. And when a crisis emerged that required his expertise, he delivered results beyond anything I could have anticipated. The consortium approved, the legal teams approved, the deal is moving forward. What exactly is the problem? The problem, Berkowitz said, is that we have no idea who this man actually is. For all we know, he could be a fraud. He could have fabricated his entire background. He could have made critical errors in translation that we won't discover until the partnership collapses in 6 months. We're signing agreements based on communication we cannot verify. David Ellington spoke up for the first time, his voice measured. Cassandra, I think what Richard is trying to say, perhaps inelegantly, is that we need documentation. State Department employment can be verified. Professional certifications can be checked. We just need evidence that supports what this man claims about his background. And if I can provide that evidence? Cassandra asked. Then we proceed with the signing, Patricia said. But Cassandra, we need it soon. The consortium arrives at 1:30 for the pre-signing reception. If we can't verify Malik Rivers' credentials by then, we have to recommend postponing until proper due diligence is complete. Postponing kills the deal, Cassandra said flatly. The consortium has already been patient with one delay. They won't tolerate another. If we push this back, they walk. Then I suggest, Berkowitz said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, you find Mr. Rivers and get us those credentials. Because right now, this looks like either spectacular negligence or spectacular fraud. Either way, it's not a good look for Sterling Dynamics leadership. The meeting ended with a deadline. Documentation by 1 p.m. or the board would vote to delay the signing. Cassandra walked out of the boardroom feeling like she'd been in a fight. Marcus followed, his face pale. This is bad, Marcus said quietly. Even if Malik is exactly who he says he is, if we can't produce documentation, Berkowitz is going to paint this as reckless leadership. And if we delay the signing, we're not delaying the signing. Cassandra's voice was steel. Find Malik. I don't care if you have to check every hotel, coffee shop, and parking garage in Manhattan. Find him and bring him to me. Cassandra, I've been trying. He's not answering his phone. He's not at his apartment. He's not. Then try harder. She stopped, forcing herself to breathe. I'm sorry. That wasn't fair. Marcus, I need him. Not just for the documentation. I need to talk to him before this ceremony. I need to make this right. Marcus's expression softened. This isn't just about the merger anymore, is it? Cassandra looked at him, this man who'd worked beside her for 7 years, who'd seen her at her worst and her best and everything in between. No, she said quietly. It's not. Her phone rang. Unknown number. She answered it like it might be a lifeline. Ms. Vale? The voice was unfamiliar, professional. This is Sarah Chen from the State Department's Bureau of Human Resources. I received a call from your office requesting employment verification for a Malik Rivers. Cassandra's heart lurched. Someone had already started making calls. Yes, that's correct. Can you verify his employment history? I can confirm that Malik Rivers was employed by the State Department from January 1994 through September 2017, serving primarily in the Bureau of International Organization Affairs. His work focused on multilateral negotiations and diplomatic interpretation. He held a GS-14 classification at the time of his departure, which is senior professional level. His performance reviews were consistently exceptional. Relief flooded through Cassandra's system like a drug. So everything he told me was true. If he told you he was a highly skilled diplomatic interpreter with extensive experience in complex negotiations, then yes, that would be accurate. May I ask why you're requesting this information? Employment verification for a high-stakes business negotiation, Cassandra said. Can you send me official documentation of his service record? I can send a verification letter within the hour. However, Ms. Vale, I should mention, when employees leave the State Department after extended service, we typically provide reference letters and career counseling. Mr. Rivers left somewhat abruptly in 2017 following a family medical situation. I'm not at liberty to discuss the details, but I wanted you to know that his departure was voluntary and in good standing. He was an asset to the department. The words hung in the air, heavy with implications. Thank you, Cassandra said. The documentation would be extremely helpful. She ended the call and looked at Marcus. State Department confirms everything. They're sending official verification. Malik Rivers is exactly who he said he was. So Berkowitz has no grounds to question his credentials. No grounds at all. Cassandra felt something settle in her chest. Not quite relief, but something adjacent to it. Which means the signing goes forward as planned. Now we just need to find Malik and tell him that his reputation is being defended by the same woman who questioned his humanity yesterday. Marcus winced. When you put it that way, it sounds awful, Cassandra finished. That's because it is awful, Marcus. I spent 3 years not seeing him, and now that I desperately need him to be present, he's nowhere to be found. And I can't even be angry about it because why would he show up? Why would he subject himself to more scrutiny and judgment after everything I said to him? Because, a voice said from behind them, quiet and steady, I gave you my word. Cassandra spun around. Malik stood 20 feet down the hallway, wearing a charcoal suit that fit him perfectly. Not a driver's uniform, but the professional attire of someone who belonged in boardrooms and high-stakes negotiations. His expression was calm, unreadable, giving nothing away. Malik. His name came out like relief and apology and a dozen other things Cassandra couldn't name. Where have you been? I've been trying to reach you for hours. I know, Malik said. I saw your calls. I needed some time to think. He walked toward them with unhurried steps, his presence filling the hallway in a way it never had before. Or maybe Cassandra was just finally paying attention. The board is questioning your credentials, Cassandra said. They want documentation proving you worked for the State Department. They're threatening to delay the signing if I can't provide evidence by 1 p.m. Something flickered across Malik's face. Not quite anger, but something harder. And what do you believe, Ms. Vale? Do you think I'm a fraud? The question was direct, unavoidable, a challenge wrapped in quiet words. Cassandra met his eyes. No, I believe every word you told me, and I just got off the phone with State Department HR. They're sending verification of your 23 years of service, your GS-14 classification, your exceptional performance reviews. You're exactly who you said you were, Malik. The board will have their documentation. Malik nodded slowly. Good. Because I didn't spend 2 decades building a career and a reputation to have it questioned by people who weren't in that room last night. I know what I did. The consortium knows what I did. That's enough. It's not enough. The words burst out of Cassandra before she could stop them. It's not enough that you saved the merger. It's not enough that you proved yourself beyond any doubt. None of it's enough because I should have known who you were 3 years ago. I should have asked. I should have seen you. Marcus cleared his throat. I'm going to go check on catering arrangements, he said, backing away with the careful diplomacy of someone who recognized a conversation that needed privacy. Malik waited until Marcus was gone, then said quietly, Should we talk now, or wait until after the signing? Now, Cassandra said, because I've been carrying this for 12 hours and I can't carry it anymore. Malik, what I said to you in the car yesterday was true. Malik's voice was matter-of-fact, not accusing. In that moment, you meant every word. You thought I was worthless. You thought I was interchangeable. You thought that proximity to your world didn't give me any understanding of it. I was wrong. You were scared, Malik corrected. And when people are scared, they lash out at whoever's closest. I've seen it 1,000 times in negotiations. The person with the most to lose becomes the person most willing to hurt others to feel in control. That doesn't excuse what I said. No, Malik agreed. It doesn't, but it explains it. An explanation isn't the same as forgiveness, but it's a start. Cassandra felt something crack in her chest. Why did you help me? After everything I said, why did you lower that partition and offer to save me? Malik was quiet for a long moment, his eyes on something distant. Because 237 people were about to lose their jobs, he finally said. Because I've been where they are, competent, skilled, valuable, and suddenly unemployed because of circumstances beyond my control. Because I knew I could help, and letting the merger collapse out of personal pride would have made me the same kind of person you were being yesterday. Selfish. Blind to consequences. The words landed like body blows, not because they were cruel, but because they were fair. You said you left the State Department in 2017, Cassandra said. What happened? Malik's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. My wife got sick. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. The diagnosis came out of nowhere. One day she was fine. The next day we were looking at 6 months of treatment with a 5% survival rate. I took family leave to care for her. Then the leave ran out and she was still fighting, so I resigned. We needed every hour we had left together more than I needed a career. The hallway seemed to contract, silence pressing in from all sides. She died 14 months later, Malik continued, his voice steady but carrying weight. The medical bills were catastrophic. Insurance covered most of it, but not all. I liquidated retirement savings, sold our house, burned through everything we'd built together just to buy her a few more months of treatment that ultimately didn't work. Cassandra felt tears burning behind her eyes. Malik, I'm so sorry. When it was over, I was 50 years old, broke, and unemployable in my field. 23 years of experience, 9 languages, dozens of successful negotiations, none of it mattered. The Foreign Service had moved on. Private sector interpretation services wanted people who were current, who hadn't taken a 2-year gap, who had recent references. I applied for 37 positions and got 37 rejections. So you started driving. So I started surviving, Malik corrected. I needed income. I needed health insurance. I needed something stable while I figured out how to rebuild. Driving paid the bills. It was honest work. It was dignified. And yes, Ms. Vale, I heard every conversation you had in the back of that car, every board meeting recap, every merger discussion, every crisis call. I listened because it was unavoidable, and because sometimes listening to other people's problems helped me forget my own for a few hours. Cassandra pressed her palm against the wall, needing something solid to anchor her. You could have told me. Any time in 3 years, you could have mentioned your background. To what end? Malik's voice held no anger, just resignation. So you could feel guilty about underutilizing me? So you could offer me a pity promotion? Ms. Vale, I've worked with people at the highest levels of government. I've mediated disputes between nations. I've watched ministers and diplomats and world leaders wrestle with impossible decisions. I learned a long time ago that people see what they expect to see. You expected a driver, so that's what you saw. Telling you otherwise wouldn't have changed anything. It would have changed everything, Cassandra's voice cracked. If you'd known, you would have felt obligated to do something about it. And I didn't want obligation. I didn't want charity. I wanted to be left alone to do my job and rebuild my life on my own terms. Malik's expression softened slightly. But yesterday, when you needed help, I made a choice. Not because I wanted recognition, because it was the right thing to do. Cassandra looked at this man who'd carried so much loss and still showed up with grace, who'd endured her cruelty and still offered salvation, who'd spent 3 years being invisible and then stepped into the light with such devastating competence that he'd made her blindness impossible to ignore. The board wants you at the signing ceremony, she said. Not as my driver, as a representative of Sterling Dynamics. They want you visible when we close this deal. The board wants documentation and liability protection, Malik corrected dryly. They don't particularly care about me being visible. I care. The words came out fierce. I care that you're recognized for what you did. I care that everyone in that room knows that this merger happened because of your skill and expertise. I care that you're not invisible anymore, Malik. Not to me, not to anyone. Malik studied her face for a long moment. Is that what you think I want? Recognition? Visibility? I think, Cassandra said carefully, you deserve both. And I think you've spent 3 years settling for less than you're worth because circumstances forced you to. And I think maybe it's time that changed. Maybe, Malik said. But Ms. Vale, if we're doing this, if we're really changing how things work, then we need to be clear about what that means. Because recognition without respect is just performance. Visibility without equity is just exploitation. If you want me in that room today, I need to know it's not just because you need me to legitimize the merger. I need to know you actually see me as an equal. The challenge hung between them, direct and unavoidable. Cassandra took a breath. You're right, and I can't prove that to you with words. I can only prove it with action. So here's what I'm proposing. After the signing, you and I sit down with Marcus and HR, and we discuss what role makes sense for you at Sterling Dynamics. Not a pity promotion, a genuine conversation about where your skills can add the most value, fair compensation, real authority, a seat at the table. And if I say no, Malik asked quietly, if I say I'm happy driving, then you keep driving and I never bother you with merger negotiations again. But Malik, I don't think you're happy driving. I think you're surviving, and I think you deserve more than survival. Malik's expression shifted, something vulnerable flickering across his face before his professional mask returned. We'll talk after the signing, he said. Right now, you have a board to satisfy and a consortium to impress. Let's focus on that. Cassandra nodded, relief and anxiety warring in her chest. The verification letter from State Department should arrive within the hour. That should be enough for Berkowitz. Good. Malik adjusted his suit jacket. Then let's go prove to your board that I'm exactly who I said I was, again. They walked toward the elevator together, and for the first time in 3 years, Cassandra was acutely aware of walking beside Malik rather than being driven by him. The shift in dynamic felt seismic, fundamental, like the ground had tilted and she was still learning how to balance. The elevator arrived. They stepped inside. The doors closed, sealing them in reflective steel and awkward silence. Malik, Cassandra said quietly, thank you for showing up, for keeping your word, for being the person I should have known you were all along. Malik met her eyes in the reflection. You're welcome, Ms. Vale, but we're not done yet. The hard part is still coming. The signing? No. A small, knowing smile crossed his face. The part where you actually follow through on everything you just promised. That's where most people fail. They make commitments in moments of crisis, but when the crisis passes, so does the urgency. Memory fades. Gratitude becomes inconvenient. And suddenly the person who saved you becomes a reminder of how close you came to failure. And reminders are easier to dismiss than to honor. The observation was surgical in its accuracy. I won't forget, Cassandra said. I won't dismiss what you did or who you are. We'll see, Malik said, not unkindly. People make promises all the time, Ms. Vale. The real question is whether they keep them when it's no longer convenient. The elevator chimed, 32nd floor. The doors opened onto the corridor where, in just over an hour, Cassandra would walk into a ceremony that would save her company and vindicate her leadership and prove that she could survive anything. And beside her would be the man she'd spent 3 years not seeing, who'd saved her from herself and was now waiting to discover if gratitude would translate into genuine change or just another performance of recognition without respect. The hard part, Cassandra realized, wasn't closing the merger. The hard part was proving that she'd actually learned something from almost losing everything. The verification letter arrived at 12:47 p.m., exactly 13 minutes before Berkowitz's deadline, delivered via secure email with the State Department's official seal emblazoned across the top. Cassandra printed 3 copies and walked them into the boardroom herself, watching Berkowitz's expression shift from smug anticipation to carefully controlled disappointment as he read the documentation. This appears to be in order, he said, his voice flat. Patricia Yong read over his shoulder, her face relaxing into something like relief. Malik Rivers served with distinction for 23 years, Cassandra said. keeping her tone professional despite wanting to throw the papers in Berkowitz's face. GS-14 classification. Exceptional performance reviews. Specialized in multilateral negotiations and diplomatic interpretation. Everything he told me was verified by State Department Human Resources. Any other concerns about his qualifications? Berkowitz set down the letter with exaggerated care. My concerns were never personal, Cassandra. They were about due diligence and protecting this company's interests. Of course they were, Cassandra said, not bothering to hide the edge in her voice. Then, I assume the board has no objection to proceeding with the signing ceremony as scheduled? Patricia spoke before Berkowitz could respond. No objection from me. If the State Department vouches for his credentials, that's sufficient verification. Cassandra, I apologize if this morning's meeting felt adversarial. We were simply trying to ensure proper protocols were followed. Understood, Cassandra said, though she understood something entirely different, that power always questioned credentials when those credentials appeared in unexpected places. That verification was demanded most loudly for the people who didn't fit comfortable categories. That Malik had been forced to prove himself in ways that would never be required of someone who looked like they belonged. She left the boardroom with the documentation and found Malik waiting in the corridor outside the main conference room, standing near a window overlooking Manhattan, his reflection ghostly in the glass. He'd been reviewing something on his phone, but looked up when she approached. Berkowitz accepted the verification, Cassandra said. No more obstacles. The signing moves forward at 2 o'clock. Good. Malik pocketed his phone. The consortium started arriving 10 minutes ago. Yamamoto's team is in the pre-ceremony reception area. Chen's people are reviewing final documents. Patel just texted. He'll be here in 5 minutes. The casual mention of direct communication with the consortium members stopped Cassandra mid-step. Patel texted you? Last night, after the meeting concluded, all 3 lead negotiators asked for my direct contact information, Malik said. Professional courtesy. They wanted to be able to reach me if any linguistic or cultural questions arose before the signing. Of course they did. Because they recognized expertise when they saw it. Because they understood that Malik wasn't just a translator, but the crucial element that had made the entire negotiation possible. Because they had no preconceptions about what someone in a driver's uniform could or couldn't be. That's good, Cassandra said, the words feeling inadequate. That shows their respect for your work. It shows they understand value when they see it, Malik said quietly, which is more than I can say for some people. The observation hung between them, not quite an accusation, but close enough to sting. Before Cassandra could respond, Marcus appeared around the corner, moving with the manic energy of someone coordinating a high-stakes event. Cassandra, we need you in the reception area. Yamamoto wants to exchange pre-ceremony greetings. Also, the photographer is here, the stenographer is set up, and Janet needs your signature on 3 final documents before... He stopped, noticing Malik. Oh, good, you're here. Yamamoto specifically asked if you'd be present for the informal reception before the signing. I'll be there, Malik said. Marcus nodded and hurried off, already pulling out his phone to coordinate the next crisis. Cassandra watched him go, then turned back to Malik. Before we go in there, she said, I need to know something. Are we okay? I know we said we'd talk after the signing, but I need to know if you're here because you want to be or because you feel obligated. Malik considered the question with the same careful attention he gave everything. I'm here because I committed to seeing this through. Whether that makes us okay is a conversation that requires more than 5 minutes in a hallway. Fair enough, Cassandra took a breath, steadying herself. Then let's go close this deal. The pre-ceremony reception was taking place in an adjacent room, smaller than the main conference space, but elegantly appointed with floor-to-ceiling windows, carefully arranged furniture, and catering that had probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. Yamamoto stood near the windows with 2 members of his team, speaking in quiet Japanese. Chen was reviewing something on a tablet while his attorneys flanked him like sentries. Patel had just arrived and was accepting a glass of champagne from one of the servers. The moment Cassandra and Malik entered, the atmosphere shifted. Yamamoto looked up and immediately moved toward them, his expression brightening. He spoke in Japanese. His words formal but warm, and Malik responded with equal formality before translating for Cassandra. Mr. Yamamoto says he's pleased to see us both. He wanted to express his personal gratitude for the professionalism demonstrated last night. He says the level of cultural sensitivity and linguistic precision exceeded his expectations. Cassandra felt a swell of something complicated, pride mixed with shame, because Yamamoto was praising work she'd nearly prevented from happening. Please tell Mr. Yamamoto that the professionalism was entirely due to Mr. Rivers' expertise, and that I'm grateful for his patience with our earlier challenges. Malik translated, but not word for word. Cassandra could hear the difference in his tone, the way he rendered her gratitude with the appropriate level of humility that Japanese business culture required. Yamamoto nodded, satisfied, then said something else in Japanese that made Malik pause before translating. Mr. Yamamoto says that in his experience, the quality of interpretation often reveals the quality of a company's leadership. Companies that value linguistic precision tend to value precision in all things. He considers your choice of interpreter to be evidence of sterling dynamics, attention to detail, and respect for partnership. The irony was almost unbearable. Cassandra hadn't chosen Malik through careful consideration or recognition of expertise. She'd been handed salvation by accident and desperation, and now was receiving credit for wisdom she hadn't possessed. Chen approached next, speaking in rapid Mandarin. Malik responded with similar fluency, and Cassandra watched the exchange with growing awareness of just how much was happening in conversations she couldn't understand. The body language was friendly, engaged, two professionals recognizing each other as equals. Mr. Chen wanted to tell me that his legal team was impressed by the precision of terminology in the revised patent language, Malik translated. He asked if I had a background in intellectual property law. I told him I'd worked on numerous technology transfer agreements during my time with the State Department. You handled tech negotiations? Cassandra couldn't hide her surprise. Among other things, Malik said, international tech policy was a major focus in the early 2000s. Patent disputes, data security agreements, cross-border innovation partnerships. I probably facilitated 50 similar negotiations over the years. Each new revelation felt like uncovering another layer of competence she'd been blind to. How many times had Sterling Dynamics struggled with international tech partnerships while Malik sat in the parking garage waiting to drive her home? Patel joined them, speaking in Hindi with the kind of warmth that transcended language barriers. Malik's response made Patel laugh, a genuine, delighted sound, and then they exchanged several more sentences before Malik translated. Mr. Patel says he's honored to be working with a company that employs someone of my caliber. I told him the honor was mine, and that his reputation for ethical manufacturing practices was well-deserved. He's inviting us both to visit his facilities in Mumbai once the partnership is formally established. Both of us? Cassandra repeated. He assumes we're a team, Malik said simply. Partners in leadership, not employer and employee. That's how he's been thinking about us since last night. The words landed with weight. The consortium saw what Cassandra had failed to see, that Malik wasn't support staff, but an essential element of Sterling Dynamics' capability, that his expertise elevated the entire company, that excluding him from leadership was a waste of talent that sophisticated business partners found confusing. Janet appeared at Cassandra's elbow with a leather portfolio. Final documents for review. We need signatures before the ceremony begins in 20 minutes. Cassandra took the portfolio and moved to a small desk near the windows, spreading out the papers. Marcus joined her, pointing out the signature lines, walking through last-minute details with the kind of nervous precision that meant he was barely holding it together. Behind them, Malik continued speaking with the consortium members, switching between Japanese, Mandarin, and Hindi with effortless fluidity, his presence commanding respect in a way that had nothing to do with job titles and everything to do with demonstrated competence. Cassandra signed document after document, her hand moving automatically while her mind tracked the conversations happening behind her. She caught fragments, Malik explaining something about manufacturing protocols to Patel, discussing supply chain logistics with Chen, addressing a cultural question from one of Yamamoto's team members. He wasn't just translating anymore. He was consulting, advising, building relationships. He was doing exactly what she should have been using him for all along. Last signature, Arke, Marcus said, pointing to the final page. And then we're officially ready. Cassandra signed her name with a flourish that felt more performative than triumphant. The merger was happening. Sterling Dynamics was saved. 237 jobs were secure. But the victory felt incomplete, shadowed by the knowledge of how close she'd come to losing everything and how thoroughly she'd misjudged the person who'd saved her. The main conference room had been transformed for the signing ceremony. The long table was covered in burgundy cloth, merger documents arranged in precise stacks at each seat. Cameras were positioned to capture the moment. The stenographer sat ready to record every word. Windows overlooked Manhattan, the city spreading out below in concrete and glass and ambition. Representatives from all parties filed in with formal ceremony. Yamamoto's team bowing respectfully before taking their seats, Chen's attorneys arranging tablets and reference materials with methodical precision, Patel settling in with his CFO beside him. Sterling Dynamics board members occupied one side of the table, Berkowitz wearing an expression that suggested he was already calculating how to take credit for the success. Cassandra took her position at the head of the table, Marcus to her right. Malik moved to stand near the wall, professional and unobtrusive, ready to interpret as needed. "No," Cassandra said, the word cutting through the pre-ceremony murmur. "Malik, you're not standing against the wall. You're sitting at this table." The room went silent. Malik met her eyes, his expression unreadable. "Ms. Vale, I'm here to interpret. I don't need a seat at—" "Yes, you do." Cassandra's voice was firm. "This merger is happening because of your expertise. You're not staff. You're not support. You're a key participant in this negotiation, and you should be recognized as such." She gestured to an empty chair directly across from her, a position of significance, visible to everyone, impossible to overlook. Berkowitz started to object. "Cassandra, that's highly unusual. The signing ceremony typically only includes—" "It includes the people who made it possible," Cassandra interrupted. "Malik Rivers saved this merger. He facilitated communication that 3 professional agencies couldn't provide. He navigated cultural complexities that would have destroyed this deal if handled poorly. He earned a seat at this table." Yamamoto spoke in Japanese, his tone approving. Malik translated automatically, his voice steady despite the tension. "Mr. Yamamoto says he agrees completely. He considers my presence at the signing table to be appropriate and respectful of my contribution." Chen added something in Mandarin, nodding firmly. "Mr. Chen seconds that sentiment. He says that in Chinese business culture, recognizing key contributors is essential to maintaining harmony and respect." Patel spoke in Hindi, his words carrying authority. "Mr. Patel says that excluding me from the signing would be insulting to the work I've done and would reflect poorly on Sterling Dynamics' understanding of partnership." The consortium had spoken. The decision was made. Berkowitz's mouth tightened, but he said nothing. Patricia Yong was smiling slightly, approval clear in her expression. The other board members looked uncertain but unwilling to argue with 3 international partners who just made their position clear. Malik walked to the empty chair and sat down, his movements composed, his expression giving away nothing. But Cassandra saw something flicker in his eyes. Surprise, maybe, or vindication, or something more complicated that couldn't be named in a moment. "Let's begin," Cassandra said. The ceremony proceeded with formal precision. Documents were distributed. Opening remarks were delivered in 3 languages, Malik translating with the same flawless accuracy he'd demonstrated the night before. Each section of the merger agreement was reviewed aloud, ensuring all parties understood every clause, every commitment, every obligation. It took 90 minutes to work through the full document, 90 minutes of careful language, diplomatic phrasing, legal precision rendered in multiple tongues. And then came the signing. Yamamoto signed first, using a fountain pen that had probably cost more than most people's cars, his signature precise and elegant. His team members added their names below his, each signature a formal commitment. Chen signed next, his attorneys flanking him, everyone moving with choreographed efficiency. The documents passed down the line, accumulating signatures, building weight. Patel signed with a smile, making a small comment in Hindi that made Malik smile in return before translating. "Mr. Patel says this is the beginning of something significant. He's looking forward to building together." The documents reached Cassandra. She picked up her pen, a Mont Blanc she'd bought to celebrate her first major deal a decade ago, and paused, looking around the table at the people who'd made this moment possible. Her gaze landed on Malik, sitting across from her, his hands folded calmly on the table, his expression professional but carrying something else underneath. Pride, maybe? Or relief? Or the quiet satisfaction of finally being seen after 3 years of invisibility. She signed her name, Cassandra Vale, CEO, Sterling Dynamics. The pen moved across paper, ink binding commitment into reality. $1.2 billion, 237 jobs, a partnership that would reshape her company's future. And sitting across from her, the man who'd made it all possible. Marcus signed next, then Janet, then the board members in sequence. Each signature added weight, finality, the irreversible momentum of decisions becoming contracts, becoming reality. The photographer captured it all, the formal signing, the handshakes, the moment when all parties stood and bowed or shook hands or embraced depending on their cultural traditions. Champagne was poured. Toasts were offered in multiple languages. Yamamoto raised his glass and spoke in Japanese, his words formal and ceremonial. Malik translated, his voice carrying through the room. Mr. Yamamoto offers a toast to partnership built on mutual respect, clear communication, and shared success. He says that Sterling Dynamics has demonstrated the kind of cultural sensitivity and professional excellence that makes truly great partnerships possible. Everyone drank. Chen offered a toast in Mandarin about innovation and collaboration. Patel spoke in Hindi about ethical business and lasting relationships. Each toast was met with raised glasses and affirmation, the ceremony becoming celebration, tension transforming into relief and cautious joy. Cassandra stood to offer her own toast, feeling the weight of the moment pressing down like atmospheric pressure. To partnerships that challenge us to be better than we were, she said, her eyes finding Malik's across the room. To recognizing talent wherever it appears, even when we've been blind to it. To the people who save us from ourselves and expect nothing in return. And to the understanding that true leadership means knowing when to listen to voices we've been ignoring. The toast was more personal than professional, breaking with the formal tone of the ceremony. But it needed to be said. It needed to be witnessed. Malik held her gaze, something unreadable passing between them. Acknowledgement, maybe, or the beginning of understanding. They drank, and the merger was sealed. The post-ceremony reception lasted another hour. Contract copies were distributed to all parties. Follow-up meetings were scheduled. Implementation timelines were reviewed. The consortium members mingled with Sterling Dynamics leadership, building the personal relationships that would support the professional partnership. Malik was constantly engaged, answering questions, clarifying details, serving as the linguistic and cultural bridge that made comfortable conversation possible. Cassandra watched him work, saw how naturally he commanded respect, how effortlessly he moved between languages and cultural contexts, and felt the full weight of 3 years of waste pressing down on her shoulders. Berkowitz approached her near the windows, champagne glass in hand, wearing an expression that was probably meant to be conciliatory. Congratulations, Cassandra. This is a significant achievement for Sterling Dynamics. It's a significant achievement for Malik Rivers, Cassandra corrected. I just signed the papers. He made it possible. Berkowitz's smile tightened. Yes, well, perhaps we should discuss incorporating him more formally into the organizational structure. His skill set is clearly valuable. Not perhaps, Richard. Definitely. Malik's getting a formal leadership position with appropriate compensation and authority. I'll be presenting the proposal to the board next week. Cassandra, let's not be hasty. The man has been a driver for 3 years. Suddenly promoting him to leadership might raise questions about favoritism or it might raise questions about why we wasted 3 years not utilizing one of the most qualified people in our organization, Cassandra interrupted. Malik has more diplomatic experience than anyone at this company. He speaks 9 languages. He just saved $1 billion merger. If that doesn't qualify him for leadership, then our standards are meaningless. Berkowitz looked like he wanted to argue, then thought better of it. We'll discuss it at the board meeting, he said stiffly, and walked away. Patricia Yong replaced him, her expression much warmer. That was well done, Cassandra. Both the merger and the way you handled Malik's recognition. I'll support whatever proposal you bring to the board. Thank you, Patricia. That means a lot. For what it's worth, Patricia said quietly, I think this experience taught you something important. Leaders who can admit they were wrong and correct course are rare. Don't waste that lesson. She drifted away, leaving Cassandra alone with her thoughts and champagne she wasn't drinking. The reception finally wound down around 5 p.m. The consortium members departed with warm farewells and promises to reconvene in 2 weeks for implementation planning. The board members left in clusters, already spinning the day's events into narratives that served their various agendas. Staff began clearing glasses and documents, dismantling the ceremonial space back into ordinary conference room. Malik was gathering his things when Cassandra approached, suddenly nervous in a way she hadn't been since her first board presentation 15 years ago. Do you have time to talk now? She asked. Actually talk, not just coordinate logistics. Malik looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. There's a coffee shop 2 blocks from here. Quiet, private enough for difficult conversations. Sounds perfect. They walked through Manhattan in silence, the late afternoon sun turning buildings into golden monuments, the city noise providing cover for the things neither of them were ready to say yet. The coffee shop was exactly as Malik had described, small, quiet, mostly empty at this hour, the kind of place where people went to think rather than to be seen. They ordered coffee, black for Malik, cappuccino for Cassandra, and found a corner table away from the windows. The silence stretched, weighted with everything that had happened over the past 36 hours. Cassandra broke it first. I owe you an apology. A real one. Not the performative kind I almost gave you last night. What I said to you in the car yesterday was cruel and wrong and completely unjustifiable. You weren't interchangeable. You weren't worthless. You weren't any of the things I said. I was terrified and angry, and I took it out on the person closest to me, and that's inexcusable. Malik listened without interrupting, his coffee untouched. But the apology isn't just for what I said yesterday, Cassandra continued. It's for 3 years of not seeing you, 3 years of treating you like furniture, 3 years of never asking a single question about who you were or what you'd done or what you were capable of. I made assumptions based on job titles and never bothered to look deeper, and that's a failure of leadership and basic human decency. Yes, Malik said quietly. It is. The agreement hurt more than an argument would have. I want to make it right, Cassandra said. I want to offer you a real position at Sterling Dynamics, VP of International Relations maybe, or Director of Strategic Partnerships. Something that actually uses your expertise. Fair compensation, full benefits, equity, real authority. You'd report directly to me, work on high-level negotiations, build out our international capabilities. I know it doesn't erase 3 years of being overlooked, but it's a start. Malik finally picked up his coffee, took a slow sip, set it down with deliberate care. And if I say no? The question caught Cassandra off guard. Why would you say no? Because accepting a position born from guilt is different from accepting a position born from respect. Because you're offering this because I saved your merger, not because you genuinely believe I belong in leadership. Because 3 days ago, you thought I was worthless, and one successful negotiation doesn't erase that. The words were calm but cutting, surgical in their precision. You're right, Cassandra said. 3 days ago, I didn't see your value. But that was my blindness, not your inadequacy. The question isn't whether you deserve a leadership role. You clearly do. The question is whether you can trust that I've actually learned something from this, or whether you think I'm just performing gratitude until the guilt fades. That is the question, Malik agreed, and I don't know the answer yet. They sat in silence, coffee cooling, afternoon light shifting through the windows. What would convince you, Cassandra finally asked? What would prove that this is genuine? Malik thought for a long moment. Time. Consistency. Evidence that you're not just promoting me, but actually changing how Sterling Dynamics thinks about talent and value. Because Ms. Vale, I'm not the only person at your company who's being overlooked. I'm just the one who happened to save your merger. How many other people are working below their capability because someone made assumptions based on their current position? The observation landed like a hammer blow. I don't know, Cassandra admitted. Then that's where we start, Malik said. Not with my promotion, with a comprehensive review of how Sterling Dynamics identifies and develops talent, with systematic changes to hiring and advancement practices, with training for leadership on unconscious bias and the cost of making assumptions. You want to make this right? Make it right for everyone, not just for me. It was a test, Cassandra realized, a challenge to prove that her transformation was genuine and comprehensive, not just convenient. Okay, she said, we'll do a full organizational review. We'll examine promotion patterns, compensation equity, hiring practices. We'll bring in outside consultants if we need to. We'll make Sterling Dynamics the kind of company that actually values people for what they can do, not what their business card says. And me? Malik asked. You can have any position you want. VP of International Relations, if that interests you. Or we create something new. Chief Cultural Officer, maybe? Overseeing all international partnerships and ensuring we never make these kinds of mistakes again. Or hell, if you want to keep driving and consulting on the side, that's your choice. I just want you to know that you have options, and that those options are based on respect for your expertise, not guilt about my past blindness. Malik was quiet for a long time, his eyes on something distant, weighing possibilities against history. I'll think about it, he finally said. But Ms. Vale, if I accept any position at Sterling Dynamics, it comes with conditions. I want authority to make real changes. I want a seat in strategic planning. I want to be heard when I raise concerns about company culture or international practices, and I want the freedom to leave if those conditions aren't met. Deal, Cassandra said without hesitation. Anything else? A small smile crossed Malik's face, the first real smile she'd seen from him since the partition had risen between them yesterday. Yeah, he said. Stop calling me Mr. Rivers in private conversation. We just closed $1 billion merger together. I think we can manage first names. Cassandra felt something loosen in her chest. Deal. And Malik, thank you for everything. For saving the merger. For teaching me what I should have seen 3 years ago. For being willing to give me a chance to prove I can do better. Don't thank me yet, Malik said. Thank me in 6 months if you've actually followed through on all these promises. Words are easy, Cassandra. Action is what counts. They finished their coffee as the sun set over Manhattan, turning the city into gold and shadow, painting possibility over the wreckage of assumptions and the beginning of something that might, with work and time and genuine commitment, become actual change. The merger was signed. The company was saved. 237 jobs were secure. But the real work, the hard, uncomfortable work of transformation, was just beginning. And for the first time in 3 years, Cassandra Vale and Malik Rivers were walking into it together, not as CEO and driver, but as partners trying to build something better than they'd inherited. The organizational review began 3 weeks after the merger signing, launched with the kind of corporate fanfare that made Malik deeply skeptical. Consultants were hired, a prestigious firm from Boston that specialized in workplace equity and talent development. Surveys were distributed to every Sterling Dynamics employee. Focus groups were scheduled. HR assembled a task force to examine promotion patterns, compensation data, and hiring practices over the past 5 years. Cassandra chaired every meeting personally, which surprised people who'd expected her to delegate the work to Marcus or Janet. But she showed up, asked hard questions, and when the preliminary data came back showing significant disparities in advancement rates based on education background and previous industry experience, she didn't make excuses or minimize the findings. This is worse than I thought, she said during a task force meeting in mid-November, staring at charts that showed how Sterling Dynamics had consistently promoted people with Ivy League degrees and Fortune 500 backgrounds over equally qualified candidates who'd taken unconventional paths. We've been replicating the same biases across every department for years. Malik sat at the conference table, not against the wall, not standing in the corner, but occupying a chair with his name placard reading, Malik Rivers, Senior Advisor for International Strategy. The title was temporary, a placeholder while they worked out what his permanent role would be, but it came with executive-level access and the authority to speak freely in leadership meetings. The pattern isn't unique to Sterling Dynamics, Malik said, reviewing the same data. Most companies default to credentialism because it feels like safe decision-making. Ivy League degree equals smart hire. Fortune 500 experience equals proven talent. But that logic ignores everyone who didn't have access to elite institutions or whose life circumstances forced them into different trajectories. Patricia Young nodded from across the table. The question is how we fix it without compromising quality. We can't just eliminate standards. We're not eliminating standards, Cassandra said. We're expanding our definition of what qualifies as excellence, skills-based hiring instead of credential-based, promotion reviews that look at actual performance rather than pedigree, training our managers to recognize talent that doesn't fit their preconceptions. Richard Berkowitz, who'd been silent through most of the meeting, finally spoke up. This sounds like a recipe for lowering our standards to meet some diversity quota. The room went tense. Malik's expression didn't change, but Cassandra saw his jaw tighten slightly. "Richard," Cassandra said, her voice dangerously calm, "if you think recognizing Malik's expertise would have been lowering our standards, then you and I have fundamentally different understandings of what excellence looks like." Berkowitz's face flushed. "I didn't mean—" "Yes, you did, and that's exactly the problem we're trying to solve." Cassandra looked around the table. "We almost lost a billion-dollar merger because I made assumptions about capability based on job titles. I'm not going to let this company keep making the same mistakes just because changing feels uncomfortable. Anyone who can't get on board with that should start thinking about whether they want to be part of Sterling Dynamics' future." The meeting continued with significantly less resistance. Over the following weeks, changes began rippling through the organization. Hiring managers were required to review resumes with identifying information removed. No names, no schools, no previous employers, just skills and accomplishments. Promotion criteria were revised to emphasize demonstrated results over years of service or prestigious backgrounds. A mentorship program was launched to connect senior leadership with high-potential employees who'd been overlooked. And every Thursday afternoon, Cassandra and Malik met in her office to review progress, discuss challenges, and plan next steps. The operations team pushed back on the blind resume reviews, Malik reported during one of their weekly meetings in early December. "They're saying it's too time-consuming and that they need context to make good decisions." Cassandra made a note on her tablet. Translation: they're uncomfortable not being able to make snap judgments based on pedigree. "Probably," Malik leaned back in his chair. "But they're not entirely wrong about context mattering. There's a difference between eliminating bias and eliminating all information. We need to find the right balance." It was the kind of nuanced observation that made these weekly meetings valuable. Malik didn't just identify problems. He helped Cassandra think through solutions that were both principled and practical. What if we keep the blind review for initial screening, but add a structured interview process that gives candidates a chance to demonstrate skills in real time? Cassandra suggested. Case studies, problem-solving exercises, presentations. Judge people on what they can do, not where they've been. "That could work," Malik said. "But it'll require training the interviewers to evaluate performance fairly. Otherwise, we're just moving the bias from resume review to in-person assessment." "Then we train them," Cassandra added another note. "We make it mandatory. Anyone involved in hiring or promotion decisions goes through unconscious bias training and learns how to conduct structured evaluations." They worked through the details for another hour, building out a comprehensive plan that addressed both the philosophical principles and the practical implementation. It was the kind of collaboration Cassandra had never experienced before. No ego, no posturing, just two people working toward a shared goal with mutual respect for each other's expertise. "How are you settling into the senior advisor role?" Cassandra asked when they'd finished the operational discussion. "Is it what you expected?" Malik considered the question carefully. "It's strange. I spent 3 years being invisible, then overnight became highly visible. People who never acknowledged me in the parking garage now want my input on major decisions. It's validating, but also disorienting." "Do you miss driving?" A small smile crossed Malik's face. "Sometimes." There was a simplicity to it. Clock in, drive, clock out. No politics, no posturing, no need to manage other people's expectations. Just competence and reliability. "But you weren't just driving," Cassandra said quietly. "You were listening to my entire professional life through that partition, processing information, Probably solving problems in your head while I panicked in the back seat. Probably, Malik admitted. It's hard to turn off 2 decades of diplomatic training. I'd hear you struggling with an international partnership and think about the cultural missteps you were making. I'd listen to merger negotiations and recognize the linguistic traps that were being set. But I couldn't say anything because drivers don't offer strategic advice to CEOs. They should if they're qualified, Cassandra said. That's what I'm learning. Competence doesn't respect hierarchy. Expertise doesn't care about org charts. We built a system that silences people based on titles, and then we wonder why we miss opportunities and make avoidable mistakes. Malik was quiet for a moment. You've changed since the merger, not just in how you treat me, but in how you approach leadership. You're questioning assumptions, listening more, pushing back against conventional thinking. It's notable. Almost losing everything tends to clarify priorities. Cassandra set down her tablet. I keep thinking about what you said in the coffee shop, about how I wasn't the only person being overlooked. How many other Maliks are sitting in our organization right now, capable of extraordinary things, but trapped in positions that don't reflect their potential? At least a dozen, based on the data we've reviewed, Malik said. Probably more we haven't identified yet. Then let's find them. Cassandra felt conviction solidifying into commitment. Let's build a company where talent gets recognized regardless of how it's packaged, where people aren't wasted because they don't fit someone's narrow definition of what excellence looks like. That's the goal, Malik agreed. But Cassandra, you need to prepare for resistance. Real change threatens people who benefited from the old system. Berkowitz isn't the only board member who's uncomfortable with what we're doing. You're going to face pushback. Let them push back, Cassandra said. We just closed a $1 billion merger that everyone said was impossible. We saved 237 jobs and built a partnership that's already generating new opportunities. Results speak louder than resistance. The pushback Malik had warned about arrived in mid-December, delivered via an email from Berkowitz requesting an emergency board meeting to discuss concerns about recent organizational changes and their impact on company performance. Cassandra read the email 3 times, her jaw tightening with each pass. The meeting was scheduled for 2 days before Christmas, clearly timed to maximize stress and minimize Cassandra's ability to prepare allies. She forwarded the email to Malik with a single line. Looks like we're about to find out if the board actually supports change or just supported saving the merger. His response came back within 5 minutes. Want me there? She replied immediately. Absolutely. We're in this together. The emergency board meeting had the feel of an ambush from the moment Cassandra walked into the room. Berkowitz had positioned himself at the head of the table despite not being board chair, and he'd assembled a stack of documents that looked suspiciously like prepared ammunition. Thank you for making time during the holiday season, Berkowitz began, his tone suggesting this was Cassandra's fault rather than his choice. I've called this meeting because several board members have expressed concerns about the direction Sterling Dynamics has taken in recent weeks. What concerns specifically? Cassandra asked, keeping her voice level. Berkowitz opened his folder. Since the merger signing, you've implemented sweeping changes to hiring and promotion practices without full board approval. You've hired expensive consultants to conduct an organizational review that's disrupting normal operations. You've created a new senior advisory position for an employee whose qualifications remain questionable, and you've been making decisions that prioritize social engineering over business performance. The accusations were delivered with prosecutorial precision, each one designed to paint Cassandra as reckless and ideologically driven. Malik sat beside her, his expression neutral but his presence solid. Patricia Young looked uncomfortable. Thomas Crawford and David Ellington were harder to read. Let me address each of those concerns, Cassandra said. First, the organizational review was initiated after discovering significant inefficiencies in how we identify and develop talent. The merger nearly failed because we'd overlooked expertise sitting right under our noses. That's a business problem, not a social engineering project. She pulled up a presentation on the conference room screen, data and charts she'd prepared anticipating exactly this confrontation. Second, the consultants we hired have already identified 12 high-potential employees who were systematically passed over for advancement despite strong performance records. 3 of them have since been promoted to positions where they are already delivering exceptional results. Two others prevented major client relationship failures by applying expertise that had been ignored for years. The ROI on this review is already positive. Berkowitz tried to interrupt, but Cassandra kept going. Third, Malik Rivers' position isn't questionable if you actually look at his credentials. 23 years at the State Department, 9 languages. Diplomatic expertise that directly contributed to closing our largest merger in company history. Since joining leadership, he's consulted on 4 international partnerships, prevented 2 cultural missteps that would have cost us significant business, and provided strategic guidance that's opened doors we didn't even know existed. She advanced the presentation to show actual business outcomes. New contracts, expanded partnerships, revenue growth directly attributable to Malik's involvement. And finally, Cassandra said, her voice hardening, the idea that recognizing talent and eliminating bias is social engineering rather than sound business practice is exactly the kind of thinking that nearly destroyed this company. We succeeded because we stopped making assumptions and started evaluating people based on what they could actually do. That's not ideology, that's competence. Patricia spoke up before Berkowitz could respond. Cassandra's right. I've reviewed the organizational changes, and the preliminary results are impressive. Employee satisfaction is up, productivity metrics are improving, and we're retaining talent that was previously looking for opportunities elsewhere. This isn't disruption, it's correction. Thomas Crawford nodded slowly. I'll admit I was skeptical about the consulting expenses, but if we're already seeing positive returns, that changes the calculation. What's the long-term implementation plan? Cassandra spent the next 30 minutes walking through the comprehensive strategy, structured interviews, blind resume reviews, bias training, mentorship programs, and systematic evaluation of advancement patterns. She showed data on reduced turnover, improved performance metrics, and increased employee engagement. Malik contributed when questions turned to international operations, speaking with quiet authority about how Sterling Dynamics' reputation had improved among global partners because of demonstrated cultural competence and respect. By the end of the presentation, even David Ellington was nodding along. Berkowitz made one last attempt. This all sounds impressive, but it doesn't change the fact that these decisions were made without proper board oversight. Cassandra, you've been operating unilaterally. I've been operating as CEO, Cassandra interrupted, making operational decisions that fall within my authority. The board approved the merger, which required organizational changes to support implementation. I've executed those changes effectively. If you want to call a vote of no confidence, Richard, then call it. But stop pretending this is about procedures when it's really about you being uncomfortable with changes that threaten your preferred way of doing business. The room went silent. Board meetings didn't usually feature this level of direct confrontation, but Cassandra was done playing political games with someone who'd tried to undermine her at every turn. Berkowitz's face went red. I'm not. You are, Patricia said firmly. Richard, I've watched you question every decision Cassandra's made since she became CEO. The Jakarta expansion, the merger negotiations, now the organizational review. At some point, we need to acknowledge that she's been right more often than she's been wrong, and that maybe our job is to support her leadership rather than constantly second-guessing it. Thomas nodded. I agree. Cassandra, you have my continued support. Let's implement these changes and evaluate results in 6 months. David Ellington added his support. One by one, the other board members fell in line. Berkowitz sat in stony silence, outmaneuvered and isolated. The meeting adjourned with Cassandra's authority intact and the organizational changes officially endorsed by the board. Malik walked with her back to her office, neither of them speaking until the door was closed. That was intense, Malik said. That was necessary. Cassandra collapsed into her chair, adrenaline crash hitting hard. Berkowitz was never going to support real change. He needed to be confronted directly. You took a risk, Malik observed, calling out a board member that openly could have backfired. Maybe, but I'm tired of leading from a defensive position. The merger proved we're capable of more than maintaining status quo. If the board can't handle that, then we need a different board. Malik smiled, a real smile, warm and genuine. You've definitely changed since the Mercedes. I had a good teacher, Cassandra said, someone who showed me what it costs to make assumptions and what becomes possible when you actually see people for who they are. The weeks between Christmas and the New Year passed in relative calm. The organizational changes continued rolling out. The merger implementation proceeded smoothly, with Yamamoto, Chen, and Patel all expressing satisfaction with the partnership's progress. Sterling Dynamics' Q4 results came in strong, revenue up 18%, employee retention at a 5-year high. And every week, Cassandra and Malik met to review progress, solve problems, and build something that was starting to look less like damage control and more like genuine transformation. In mid-January, Malik finally made his decision about his permanent role at Sterling Dynamics. "I want to create a new position," he told Cassandra during their Thursday meeting. "Not VP of International Relations, not Chief Cultural Officer, something different." "I'm listening." "Director of Strategic Talent Development," Malik said. The role would focus on identifying overlooked expertise within the organization and creating pathways for people to contribute at their highest capability. "I'd work across departments, mentor high-potential employees who don't fit traditional advancement patterns, and serve as a check on hiring and promotion decisions to make sure we're actually evaluating talent fairly." Cassandra felt something click into place. "That's perfect. It addresses the systemic issues while giving you the authority to make real changes." "And it's something I actually want to do," Malik added. "I enjoyed the diplomatic work, but I think I'm better suited to building systems than managing negotiations. This role would let me make sure what happened to me doesn't happen to others." "Then let's make it happen." Cassandra pulled up her calendar. "We'll present it to the board at the February meeting. With the organizational review results as evidence, they'd be foolish to object." "And the compensation package?" Malik asked. "I want equity, not just salary. If I'm building long-term value for Sterling Dynamics, I should share in that value." "Agreed. I'll have HR put together a proposal." Cassandra made notes on her tablet. "Malik, I want you to know this past 3 months have been the best professional partnership I've ever had. You challenge me, you make me think harder, and you hold me accountable to actually following through on commitments. I'm grateful." "Don't be grateful yet," Malik said, echoing his words from the coffee shop months ago. "Be grateful in a year if we've actually built something lasting." But there was warmth in his voice now, the skepticism tempered by growing trust. The February board meeting approved Malik's new role unanimously. Even Berkowitz voted in favor, recognizing that opposing it would only further isolate him. The compensation package included competitive salary, full benefits, and equity that would vest over 4 years, real ownership in the company he was helping transform. The announcement went out to all Sterling Dynamics employees in late February, accompanied by a memo from Cassandra explaining the new Director of Strategic Talent Development position and inviting anyone who felt overlooked or underutilized to schedule time with Malik. The response was overwhelming. Within a week, Malik had 53 meeting requests from employees across every department, every level of seniority. People who'd been waiting for someone to finally see them. He met with each one personally, listening to their stories, reviewing their capabilities, identifying opportunities. Some conversations resulted in immediate promotions. Others led to lateral moves that better aligned skills with responsibilities. A few revealed problems with specific managers who'd been systematically suppressing talent, which prompted HR investigations, and in 2 cases, terminations. By April, Sterling Dynamics had promoted or reassigned 41 employees based on Malik's recommendations. Productivity metrics continued climbing. Employee satisfaction surveys showed dramatic improvements in feelings of recognition and opportunity. And the business results spoke for themselves. Q1 revenue was up 23% year over year, driven largely by innovations and efficiencies identified by newly empowered employees who'd previously been invisible. The consortium took notice. In early May, Yamamoto invited Cassandra and Malik to Tokyo for a partnership review meeting. They spent a week in Japan, touring facilities, meeting local teams, and discussing expansion opportunities. On the final evening, Yamamoto hosted a private dinner at a traditional restaurant in Ginza, the kind of place where meals cost more than most people's monthly salary, and every detail carried cultural significance. Halfway through the meal, after several rounds of sake and increasingly warm conversation, Yamamoto switched to Japanese and spoke directly to Malik. Malik listened, responded, and then translated for Cassandra, his voice carrying emotion he usually kept carefully controlled. Mr. Yamamoto says that in his 40 years of business, he's rarely seen a company transform itself so completely in such a short time. He attributes our success to two factors: leadership willing to admit mistakes, and the wisdom to recognize talent regardless of where it appears. He says Sterling Dynamics has become the kind of partner other companies aspire to be. Yamamoto continued in Japanese, his words flowing with formal poetry. He's offering us an expanded partnership, Malik translated. Chen and Patel have both agreed they want to triple our joint venture scope, adding manufacturing in 3 new countries and doubling our innovation investment. It would make this the largest international partnership Sterling Dynamics has ever had. Cassandra felt her breath catch. Tell Mr. Yamamoto we're honored and absolutely interested. And tell him that none of this would have been possible without the person sitting across from me, the one whose expertise I was too blind to see for 3 years. Malik translated, adding nuances Cassandra couldn't provide. Yamamoto smiled, raised his sake cup, and offered a toast. To partnerships built on mutual respect, Malik translated, to leaders who grow, and to the understanding that talent reveals itself when we're finally willing to look. They drank, sealing the agreement in spirit, if not yet in contract. The flight back to New York was late at night, first-class seats that felt impossibly luxurious after a week of intensive meetings. Cassandra worked on her laptop for a while, reviewing the preliminary terms of the expanded partnership, but eventually gave up and stared out the window at darkness broken by distant lights below. "What are you thinking about?" Malik asked from the seat beside her. "How different everything is now compared to 6 months ago," Cassandra said. 6 months ago, I was terrified of losing everything. Now we're negotiating the biggest expansion in company history. 6 months ago, I thought you were just a driver. Now you're the person I trust most in the entire organization. 6 months ago, I was just a driver, Malik said quietly. That wasn't your imagination. It was my reality. But it shouldn't have been. No, Malik agreed. It shouldn't have been. But Cassandra, here's what I've learned through this whole experience. The problem wasn't just that you didn't see me. The problem was that the entire system is designed to keep certain people invisible. It's not personal. It's structural. And what you've done at Sterling Dynamics isn't just fixing how you see me. It's fixing the systems that keep talented people trapped in positions that don't reflect their capability. Cassandra turned away from the window to face him. Do you think we're actually succeeding? Or are we just making symbolic changes that feel good but don't fundamentally shift anything? Malik considered the question with his usual careful thought. I think we're succeeding. The data supports it. Improved retention, better performance, stronger partnerships. But more importantly, people feel it. When I meet with employees now, they talk about feeling seen for the first time, about finally having opportunities they thought were closed off, about believing the company actually values what they can contribute. That's not symbolic. That's real change. Good, Cassandra said, because I need this to be real. I need to know that what happened between us, the merger, the confrontation, everything after, actually meant something beyond saving my company. It meant something, Malik said. It meant you were willing to look at yourself honestly, admit you were wrong, and do the hard work of becoming better. Most people never make it that far. They defend their blindness instead of correcting it. The plane flew through darkness, carrying them back to Manhattan, back to Sterling Dynamics, back to the work of building something that might actually last. Thank you, Cassandra said quietly, for saving me from myself, for teaching me what I needed to learn, for staying when you could have walked away. You're welcome, Malik said. But Cassandra? The person who saved you from yourself was you. I just gave you the opportunity to make a different choice. 3 months later, on a warm August afternoon, Sterling Dynamics held a company-wide celebration to mark the 1-year anniversary of the merger signing. The entire organization gathered, 237 employees whose jobs had been saved, plus 83 new hires brought in through the reform talent development process. Cassandra stood at the front of the assembled company, looking out at faces that represented everything they'd built. Marcus was there, grinning with relief at having survived the most stressful year of his professional life. Janet stood beside him, holding a tablet that probably contained 17 different backup plans. Patricia Yong had come as a board representative, her presence signaling continued support. And beside Cassandra, wearing a suit that marked him as leadership rather than service, Malik Rivers stood with quiet confidence. 1 year ago, Cassandra began, her voice carrying across the room, this company was 90 minutes away from catastrophic failure. The merger that would save 237 jobs was collapsing because I couldn't find interpretation services. I was desperate, terrified, and completely out of options. She paused, letting the memory settle. And then the person I'd overlooked for 3 years, the person I'd dismissed as interchangeable and worthless, revealed that he spoke 9 languages and had diplomatic expertise I desperately needed. Malik Rivers saved this merger. But more than that, he taught me that talent doesn't respect hierarchy, that expertise doesn't care about job titles, and that the most dangerous blindness isn't failing to see, it's choosing not to look. The room was silent, everyone listening. This past year, we've worked to build a company that actually recognizes talent wherever it appears. We've changed how we hire, how we promote, how we develop people. We've eliminated barriers that kept capable employees invisible. And the results speak for themselves. Record revenue, record retention, partnerships that have made Sterling Dynamics a global leader in our industry. Cassandra looked at Malik, saw him watching her with something that looked like pride. But the real success isn't in the numbers. It's in the stories I've heard over the past year. The operations manager who'd been passed over for a decade and is now running our most efficient division. The customer service representative who spoke 4 languages and is now our liaison with European partners. The warehouse supervisor with an engineering degree who redesigned our entire logistics system. Talented people who were always here, always capable, just waiting for someone to finally see them. She turned to face Malik directly. Malik, when we started this journey, you said people make promises in crisis but fail to follow through when the urgency fades. You challenged me to prove that my commitment was genuine. I hope this past year has been evidence that I meant every word. Malik smiled, then stepped forward to stand beside her. Cassandra invited me to say a few words, he said, his voice calm but carrying across the room. A year ago, I was driving her Mercedes, sitting behind a partition that separated us in more ways than physical distance. I'd spent 3 years being invisible, listening to conversations I wasn't part of, watching a company that didn't know I existed. He paused, looking out at the assembled employees. I could be bitter about that. I could focus on the waste, the lost opportunities, the years spent in a position that didn't reflect my capability. But instead, I choose to focus on what became possible when one person finally looked beyond their assumptions. When Cassandra saw me, really saw me, she didn't just change my life. She changed how this entire company thinks about talent, value, and potential. Malik pulled something from his pocket, a small leather wallet worn at the edges. He opened it to show his old Sterling Dynamics driver ID, then held up beside it another item, an ornate wooden plaque with Japanese calligraphy. A gift from Yamamoto inscribed with words about honor and partnership. I keep both of these in my office, Malik said. The ID reminds me where I was. The plaque reminds me where I am. But what matters most isn't the distance between them. It's the lesson they represent. That transformation is possible when we're willing to question our assumptions, admit our mistakes, and do the uncomfortable work of seeing people for who they actually are. He looked around the room, making eye contact with employees at every level. If you're here and feeling invisible, if you're capable of more than your current position reflects, if you're waiting for someone to finally recognize your talent, I see you. This company sees you now. And we've built systems to make sure you don't stay invisible. Talk to me. Talk to your managers. Talk to anyone in leadership. We're listening in ways we weren't a year ago. The applause that followed was thunderous, genuine, the sound of people who felt recognized and valued. After the celebration, after the speeches, and the catering, and the obligatory photos, Cassandra and Malik found themselves alone in her office as evening fell over Manhattan. The city lights were coming on, towers of ambition glowing against the darkening sky. We did it, Cassandra said, looking out at the view she'd almost lost. We actually built something that matters. You did it, Malik corrected. I just helped you see what was always possible. Don't diminish your role in this. Cassandra turned from the window. Everything we've accomplished this year happened because you were willing to take a chance on someone who treated you terribly. You could have walked away. You should have walked away. But you stayed, and you helped me become better than I was. Malik leaned back in his chair, the same chair he'd occupied for dozens of Thursday meetings over the past year. I stayed because I saw potential, not just in you, but in what Sterling Dynamics could become if we actually fixed the broken systems. I stayed because 237 people deserve to keep their jobs. And I stayed because sometimes teaching people is more valuable than punishing them. Thank you, Cassandra said, for all of it. For saving the merger, for transforming the company, for being patient while I learned what I should have known all along. You're welcome. But Cassandra, this is just the beginning. We've made progress, but there's still work to do. Still people being overlooked. Still assumptions being made. Still systems that need fixing. The real test isn't what we've accomplished in 1 year. It's whether we can sustain this for 10 years, 20 years. Whether we can build something that outlasts both of us. We will, Cassandra said with conviction, because we're not doing this alone anymore. We've trained a generation of leaders to think differently. We've built systems that force people to look beyond their biases. We've created a culture that actually values what people can do instead of what their resume says they should be able to do. Malik nodded slowly. Then I guess we'd better get back to work. They sat together in comfortable silence, two people who'd traveled an impossible distance over the past year, from CEO and driver, separated by a partition, to partners building something that might actually change how companies thought about talent and value and human potential. Outside the windows, Manhattan glittered with 1,000 different stories. People working late, people heading home, people dreaming about futures they might never reach, people trapped in positions that didn't reflect their capability. But inside Sterling Dynamics, in offices and warehouses and operations centers across the company, 41 people who'd been invisible a year ago were now leading projects, managing teams, solving problems, contributing at levels they'd always been capable of but had never been allowed to demonstrate. And in offices across the city, other companies were starting to notice, starting to ask questions, starting to wonder if maybe Sterling Dynamics had figured out something important about talent and transformation. The story that had started with a dying merger and a desperate CEO and a driver who spoke 9 languages had become something bigger, a proof of concept that change was possible, that blindness could be corrected, that the most valuable assets in any organization might be the people everyone had decided weren't worth seeing. Cassandra looked at Malik, this man who'd saved her from herself and taught her what leadership actually meant, and felt gratitude mixed with determination. They'd built something real, something that mattered, something that would outlast the crisis that had sparked it. And somewhere, in a parking garage or a mailroom or a warehouse, another Malik was waiting to be seen. Another talented person trapped in a position that didn't reflect their capability. Another opportunity for a leader to choose looking over blindness. The work was never finished. The transformation was ongoing. But for the first time in her career, Cassandra Vail understood that the greatest leadership wasn't about having all the answers. It was about being willing to learn from the people you'd been too blind to see. And that lesson, hard-won and painfully earned, was worth more than any merger, any partnership, any quarterly earnings report. It was the difference between managing a company and actually leading one.